Chapter 1784. Hearing the footsteps, when Zyron, who was originally pacing anxiously, quickly sat down in a serious manner, as if nothing had happened before. Creak. The door opened, and a figure walked into the room. When Zyron's back was facing the door, and he didn't turn around. Come on, stop pretending. Ying didn't come. Bachin looked at when Zyron's posture and knew that when Zyron was pretending. He directly opened the door and went straight to the point. Hearing Bachin's voice, when Zyron couldn't help but turn around. After seeing that there was only Bachin and Shangguan Ying's figure behind him, he couldn't help but frown. His expression was filled with doubts. Where's Ying? Your Ying abducted my Hong Zhuang. Bachin walked to the opposite side of when Zyron and sat down. His beautiful face was filled with helplessness. When Zyron was dumbfounded. What's going on? Your Ying has already decided to stay in Tiangang's sect and be good sisters with Hong Zhuang. Hong Zhuang said that it doesn't matter how long she wants to stay. In my opinion, you'd better coax Ying quickly. Bachin was very sad. It was fine that Zyron and Ying had a conflict, but who would have thought that Ying would actually occupy Hong Zhuang? In desperation, he could only team up with Zyron. When Zyron, who was originally very helpless, couldn't help but laugh after seeing Bachin's appearance. Haha, Bachin, it seems that you really like Hong Zhuang. In the past, everyone thought that you weren't interested in women. I think you put all your interest in Hong Zhuang. When Zyron laughed loudly. In the past, you couldn't stand me being with Ying. Now it's my turn to be unable to stand you. He clearly remembered that when he and Ying were together in the past, Bachin couldn't stand them. He didn't expect that now that Ying had just snatched Hong Zhuang for a while, Bachin had already urged him to reconcile with Ying. However, Bachin didn't take Zyron's ridicule to heart. At that time, I was a single man. Now, I have a wife. Of course, it's different. Looking at Bachin's unperturbed expression, Wen Ran also felt a burst of admiration. To be able to say such things with such a serious appearance. She was afraid that besides Bachin, there was no other person who could do it. Then what should we do now? When Zyron frowned. If Ying really lived with Hong Zhuang in Tiangang's sect, then the person who was troubled should be him. Who asked you to run away every time something happens? Now that your wife has run away, you can only chase after her. Bachin shrugged indifferently. He had never interfered in the matters between Zyron and Ying. Because, with the degree of rebuke between these two people, once they reconciled, then the person who was in the wrong would be him. He, Bachin, wouldn't do such a thankless thing. You're too unloyal. When Zyron was speechless, in any case, we're brothers. For other things, you can ask me for help. But for this kind of thing, it's better for you to solve it yourself. Bachin shook his head. He also had no experience in dealing with this kind of thing. Fortunately, Hong Zhuang had always had an excellent character. From the time they got along until now, they had been apart more than together. Naturally, it was impossible for them to have a dispute. Chapter 1785. At dinner time, Bailey Hong Zhuang and Shangguan Ying had dinner together. Shangguan Ying was extremely enthusiastic. She was like an old friend to Bailey Hong Zhuang at first sight. She pulled Bailey Hong Zhuang and said a lot of things to her. However, Bailey Hong Zhuang could feel that Ying was still thinking about Zyron. From that subtle expression, it could be judged that she always looked outside the house from time to time. Although the movements were very small, they were still seen by Bailey Hong Zhuang. Bailey Hong Zhuang also looked outside the house. She didn't know if Bachin would come over with Zyron at dinner time. She naturally hoped that the unpleasantness between Ying and Zyron could be resolved as soon as possible. In this way, Ying could be happier. Since Ying came, Ying had been talking about various things when she was young with Zyron and Bachin. Although Ying mainly talked about Bachin to her, she couldn't help but talk about Zyron. Just from his expression, Bailey Hong Zhuang could understand Ying's feelings for Zyron. However, Bachin didn't come with Zyron until now. Bailey Hong Zhuang couldn't help but frown. She didn't ask Ying why she was unhappy with Zyron this time. However, since Ying had already come to Tiangang's sect, Zyron should also come to see her. A moment later, 2 footsteps sounded outside the house. Hearing this sound, Shangwan Yingying's eyes changed a little, but she forced herself not to look outside the house. When Ziren walked into the house behind Di Beichen, after seeing Bailey Hongzhuang, Di Beichen smiled gently and sat down beside Bailey Hongzhuang. When Ziren glanced at Di Beichen, then unnaturally sat down beside Shangwan Yingying. Looking at this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but find it a little funny. She couldn't tell that Ziren's sunny and confident appearance from before would have such an expression when facing Yingying. Shangwan Yingying also knew that Ziren was beside her, but she didn't say anything. She only minded her own business and ate her own food. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Shangwan Yingying and then at Ziren. Neither of them spoke. Di Beichen held Bailey Hongzhuang's little hand under the table and said with a smile, "Don't worry about them. It'll be fine in a while." Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know how Di Beichen came to this conclusion, but she always believed in Di Beichen's words. Under Di Beichen's signal, Bailey Hongzhuang quickly finished her meal and then walked out of the house with Di Beichen. Shangwan Hongzhuang couldn't help but want to say something when she saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to leave. However, she still didn't say anything after Di Beichen held Bailey Hongzhuang's hand and left. Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang returned to their own house together. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a faint smile. As long as Yingying and Ziren met, the problem would be solved soon. "You called Ziren over?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked with a smile. "He didn't deal with the trouble he caused himself. Could it be that he wants my wife to help him deal with it?" Di Beichen said. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. "Yingying is a very good person. I heard a lot about you from Yingying today." Di Beichen raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "It's good to know. It's also good to let you know how loyal your husband is to you." Chapter 1786. The next day, when Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen saw Shangwan Yingying and when Ziren again, everything was as Di Beichen had expected. The two of them had reconciled. From afar, they could feel the closeness between the two. Bailey Hongzhuang also understood Di Beichen's feelings when he saw the two of them being so sweet. "How did you know that they would reconcile so quickly?" Bailey Hongzhuang turned to look at Di Beichen. The quarrel yesterday seemed to be very serious. It would take a while for them to reconcile. Husband and wife always quarrel at the head of the bed and reconcile at the end of the bed. If you don't believe me, you can try in the future. Di Beichen's smile was devilish and teasing. In his eyes, such an ignorant wife was really cute. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was startled at first. After understanding Di Beichen's meaning, he couldn't help but glare at Di Beichen. Di Beichen smiled indifferently. Every time he teased his wife, it was always very interesting. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang, Shangwan Yingying walked over with a smile. "Hongzhuang, you're here." Bailey Hongzhuang greeted her with a smile. "It's great to see that you two have reconciled." Shangwan Yingying curled her lips and subconsciously glanced at Ziren. Then she smiled and said, "If he didn't admit his mistake, I wouldn't have forgiven him." Ziren slowly walked over with a helpless expression. Then he raised his eyebrows and looked at Di Beichen. He had to coax his wife like this. In the future, he would have to do the same. However, Di Beichen didn't care. He would make Hongzhuang angry. "Hongzhuang, I heard that you were the champion of the assessment competition. I really admire you. In order to be together with Beichen, you even participated in the assessment competition. If you're not careful, you might be in danger." Shangwan Yingying's eyes were filled with amazement. If it were her, she would not do such a thing. Bailey Hongzhuang said with an elegant smile on her exquisite and beautiful face, "There are some things that you should take responsibility for." Until now, she did not regret her decision to participate in the assessment competition. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang so calm, Shangwan Yingying and Ziren felt even more emotional. Di Beichen's vision was always good. He went to Fengbo country and was able to find such a good wife. As friends, they were happy for Di Beichen. Han Xiling is always so aggressive. "Hongzhuang, I'm starting to like you more and more." Shangwan Yingying turned to Di Beichen and said, "Beichen, Hongzhuang is my friend. If you dare to mistreat her in the future, I won't let you off. If I mistreat her, who else can I treat well? Di Beichen's expression was calm. From a moment he fell in love with Hong Zhuang. He was determined to treat Hong Zhuang well. He would not forgive anyone who dared to hurt Hong Zhuang, and it was even more impossible for him to do so. Seeing Di Beichen's solemn expression, Shangguan Yingying was slightly stunned, but then she smiled. It's good that you know. Bailey Hong Zhuang looked at Di Beichen in front of her, and the corners of her mouth unconsciously rose. Beichen had always been able to give her an indescribable sense of security. Di Beichen put one hand on Bailey Hong Zhuang's shoulder. You don't have to worry about me and Hong Zhuang. It's good that you don't have to have any conflicts. Chapter 1787. When Ziren, who was still gloating, was dumbfounded when he saw Shangguan Yingying suddenly turn the spearhead to him. How did the problem shift to him? Di Beichen looked at Wen Ziren with a smile. Who asked this guy to be so proud now? Now he couldn't be proud anymore. Wife, I'm also very good to you. Wen Ziren's face was full of smiles. He finally reconciled with Yingying, and he didn't want to have another conflict later. Seeing this, Bailey Hong Zhuang and Di Beichen's faces were full of smiles. From Di Beichen's mouth, Bailey Hong Zhuang learned that Dr. Feng, who helped Di Beichen treat his leg disease, was found by Wen Ziren. When Di Beichen was in Feng Bo country, Ziren and Shangguan Yingying were still very concerned about him. They cherished the friendship they had built up since they were young. When Ziren and Shangguan Yingying stayed in Tiangang sect for a few days before leaving. The two also had a lot of things to deal with in the sect, so they couldn't stay out for too long. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. Today was the day when the new disciples came to report. Bailey Hong Zhuang left the cultivation state early, waiting for the arrival of Jiqing and the others. These days, she, Beichen, and the 3 beasts often cultivated in the Door of Darkness. Di Beichen was obviously very interested in the world in the Door of Darkness. With Di Beichen by Bailey Hong Zhuang's side, she was also a lot safer in the desert world. With less threat to her life, she could also deal with the monsters wholeheartedly. As long as Bailey Hong Zhuang didn't ask for help, Di Beichen wouldn't help. After all, Hong Zhuang also needed the opportunity to improve her strength. The 3 beasts were also diligently cultivating here. Xiao He and Xiao Bai transformed into huge figures under Di Beichen's astonished gaze. White Lion's body was also constantly growing. This was the most suitable place for him to cultivate. Every time after a big battle, White Lion would eat demon crystals and replenish itself quickly. Wife, Gong Shaoqing, and the others should have already arrived at the mountain gate. Let's go take a look. You'll be cultivating with them today, Di Beichen said slowly. Bailey Hong Zhuang nodded. Okay, let's go take a look. On such an important day, Gong Shaoqing and the others would not be late. Di Beichen and Bailey Hong Zhuang walked together to the gate of Tiangang sect. From today onwards, Bailey Hong Zhuang chose to cultivate in one of the 4 halls. Today was the day that the new disciples came to report. The disciples of Tiangang sect all knew, and many people were paying close attention. Although they already knew that Bailey Hong Zhuang won first place in the assessment competition, they were still curious about which dynasty the other cultivators were from. When Di Beichen and Bailey Hong Zhuang appeared in front of everyone, everyone's eyes were filled with amazement. They knew that Bailey Hong Zhuang was staying in the young sect master's bedroom during this period. Moreover, the sect master obviously had no objections to Bailey Hong Zhuang and Di Beichen being together. In their opinion, it wouldn't be long before the young sect master and Bailey Hong Zhuang got married. In this way, Bailey Hong Zhuang's identity would be completely different in the future. It seems that the relationship between the young sect master and Bailey Hong Zhuang is really good. The young sect master really likes Bailey Hong Zhuang. This Bailey Hong Zhuang is really lucky. Chapter 1788. The cultivators of Tiangang sect no longer disliked Bailey Hong Zhuang as before because after the assessment competition, Bailey Hong Zhuang had already proven her strength. Now, everyone could only sigh with emotion at Bailey Hong Zhuang's good luck to be able to meet the young sect master when he was at his lowest point. She was really lucky. In fact, Many people also understood that Bailey Hongzhuang was not trying to climb up the social ladder. This was because when the young sect master left Tiangang's sect, he had already become a cripple. Even the disciples who were cultivating in Tiangang's sect at that time felt that the young sect master would never be able to stand up again after seeing him in that state. Therefore, at that time, other than lamenting, they did not have any thoughts of getting close to the young sect master. Therefore, it was not strange for the young sect master to fall in love with Bailey Hongzhuang. The feeling of providing charcoal in snowy weather was often extremely precious. Some male cultivators understood this very well. The woman who climbed up the social ladder when they were successful could not be compared to the woman who accompanied them when they were suffering. It was because they understood this feeling that many male cultivators respected Bailey Hongzhuang. To be able to be together with Di Beichun under such circumstances, this kind of woman was worthy of admiration. Bailey Hongzhuang listened to the discussions of the surrounding cultivators and could not help but find it funny. It seemed that in many people's eyes, she was the one with extremely good luck. Young sect master, Miss Bailey. A gray figure appeared beside Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun and bowed to them with a modest smile on his face. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but turn around to look at the person. She had met this elder before, but she did not know him very well. Di Beichun lowered his head to see Bailey Hongzhuang's astonished look and immediately explained. It should have been the great elder who came to welcome the new disciple, but the great elder is still in confinement, so the second elder was sent. Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly understood. She had not seen the great elder since he was punished. She understood that whether it was her grandfather or Beichun, they were slowly dispersing the power in the great elder's hands. Since she recognized her grandfather, he had doted on her very much, and she also understood that her grandfather was a very protective person. Since the great elder was a threat to her, her grandfather naturally would not let such a threat continue to exist. Perhaps the great elder would not come out for a while. Even if he came out, the situation would be completely different from before. However, this was a good thing for her. Originally, she was still a little worried that after she came to Tiangang's sect to cultivate, the first elder would obstruct her. Now that the first elder was punished and confined, she was also free of this trouble. Second elder. Bailey Hongzhuang bowed to the second elder, Xiaoingzi. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang bowing to him, Xiaoingzi was slightly stunned and somewhat flattered. Everyone knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was the future wife of a young sect master, and her status was very noble. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master had not yet married. So as the elders of the sect, they were very conflicted about how to treat Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, seeing Bailey Hongzhuang bowing to him, he could not help but be a little surprised. This, Chapter 1789. Di Beichun nodded to Xiaoingzi and said, Hongzhuang is now a new disciple of Tiangang's sect. Second elder should treat her as you should. You don't have to care about anything else. Hongzhuang had already told him about this matter before. Since she was a cultivator who had passed the assessment competition and joined Tiangang's sect, she naturally did not want to get too many privileges in this regard. She should cultivate well. After all, they had not married yet. Listening to Di Beichun's words, Xiaoingzi responded, yes. Xiaoingzi, who was still worried about how to deal with this matter, was relieved after hearing Di Beichun's words. At least he didn't have to worry about whether he should salute Bailey Hongzhuang or Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. At present, she was just an ordinary disciple of Tiangang's sect. After cultivating here for 3 months, she would go to Wuji Palace to learn from her master. If she was treated too special here, it would cause inconvenience to the elders. Second elder, are you going to pick up the new disciples now? Di Beichun asked aloud. Xiaoingzi nodded and said, yes, it's almost time now. I think they have already arrived. Then let's go down together. Di Beichun looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. He thought that Hongzhuang had not seen Xia Jiqing and the others for such a long time. She should miss them very much. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were tinged with joy. When Jiqing and the others returned to their respective homes, they must be very happy. Now that they could cultivate together in Tiangang's sect, This was undoubtedly a very happy thing. Yes, Xiao Yingzi responded, and then followed Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang to the bottom of Tiangang's sect. He was different from the Great Elder. He was originally on the side of the young sect master. Now that the sect master had returned, Tiangang's sect had the sect master in charge, and the sect master had given all the rights to the young sect master. At this time, the best way was to listen to the arrangements of the young sect master. Those who had previously been hostile to the young sect master did not have a good ending. He would never make such a mistake. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen went all the way down the mountain and soon arrived at the gate. Gong Shaoqing, Xia Jiqing, and the others had already arrived outside. With the appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, Xia's and the others' faces all showed smiles. "Boss, you are here." After not seeing Bailey Hongzhuang for more than 2 months, Xia Jiqing only felt a burst of joy when she saw her. Ever since she met Boss, apart from when Boss went to the Bloodground Abyss, she had always been with Boss. This time, she had been missed to sect, miss master. She had long known that the sect master must have come to Tiangang's sect with Di Beichen early. Now that she saw the sect master coming to pick them up, she felt very happy. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was also filled with a happy smile. "You are here." Gong Shaoqing and the others smiled and nodded. Compared to the unreachable feeling when they first came to Tiangang's sect, there was only excitement in their hearts now. "I haven't seen you for a while." Everyone's face is a lot rosier. Chapter 1790. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Dongfang Yu and the others all laughed. With the results they achieved in the assessment competition, it was natural for them to be praised when they returned to their respective dynasties. The people and their families were also very good to them. Under the glorious eyes of everyone, they only felt that the hardships they suffered in the assessment competition were nothing at all. For the final result, everything was worth it. They seemed to have become heroes the moment they returned. Everyone praised them, and many young cultivators regarded them as idols. Such a scene was beyond their expectations. In the past, they had never thought that they would one day achieve such good results. Under such circumstances, they were naturally in a good mood, and their faces immediately became rosy. "Boss, you don't know, after I went back this time, the people in the family praised me to the sky." Xia Jiqing's face could not hide the excitement. She had never enjoyed such treatment in the family before. Although her cultivation talent was not bad, because her personality was too straightforward, there were not many people in the family who liked her. However, after going back this time, her situation had completely changed. "Do you still remember Tong Xingyi?" Xia Jiqing asked aloud. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a while and immediately nodded. Thinking back, it was because Tong Xingyi kept finding trouble with her that she met Jiqing. However, after Tong Xingyi learned that she was a student of the special enrollment class, she did not provoke her. Gradually, she didn't take Tong Xingyi to heart. The Tong family is not far from our Xia family. I have had conflicts with Tong Xingyi since I was a child. When I went back, Tong Xingyi was also at home. After she knew my results, she was furious, haha. When she thought of Tong Xingyi's sullen, excited and incredulous expression, she felt a burst of joy. In the past, Tong Xingyi always liked to be arrogant in front of her, but now she could only tuck her tail in front of her. Looking at Xia Jiqing's happy appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang's smile widened. As early as the first time they met, she knew that there was a grudge between Jiqing and Tong Xingyi. Now that she could hold her head high, it was indeed a happy thing. At this moment, Yuan Xiaoman also walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side, her delicate face filled with a joyful smile. "Boss," Liqing was so excited when she found out that you and I were on the same team. When Yuan Xiaoman returned to the Snow Origin country, her and Yuan Zhiexin's results in the assessment had already been made known to everyone. Therefore, when they returned to the clan, everyone in the clan was already there to welcome them. When Yuan Hongyang and Yuan Liqing found out that it was because of their boss that they were able to achieve such results in the competition, they were extremely shocked. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "How is Liqing doing now?" "She's doing very well. She just hopes to see you again one day," Yuan Xiaoman said with a smile. Yuan Jixin also walked up at this moment, his handsome face relaxed and happy. Boss, Hongyang asked me to thank you on behalf of the entire Yuan family. If it weren't for you, the Yuan family situation wouldn't be as good as it is now. Chapter 1791. Back then, when the big boss and a young sect master had gone to Origin Martial City, they had helped the Yuan family. Otherwise, the Yuan family would have fallen into trouble. After that, he and Xiaoman had met the big boss and had been helped by the big boss. This news had exceeded the expectations of everyone in the Yuan family. In the history of the Snow Origin dynasty, there's never been such a good result. Therefore, their names have now spread throughout the entire Snow Origin country. Even though he had a dream of becoming a hero since he was young, he had never thought that he would actually be able to achieve it. Now, he was a hero that everyone in the Snow Origin country knew about. The entire Yuan family was proud of him and Xiaoman. All of this was because of the big boss. If it had not been for the big boss, forget about becoming a hero, they would have become corpses in the great examination. Therefore, Yuan Jixin's gratitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang could no longer be expressed in words. He had already secretly vowed that he would go through water and tread on fire for the big boss in the future. If it had not been for the big boss, they would have lost everything by now. Therefore, their lives belonged to the big boss. It was not only Yuan Jixin, Yuan Xiaoman also had the same thought. In the future, anyone who tried to harm the big boss would be their enemy. If they wanted to harm the big boss, they would have to step over their bodies. Bailey Hongzhuang was unaware of Yuan Jixin and Yuan Xiaoman's thoughts. After hearing Yuan Hongzhuang's gratitude towards her, she could not help but smile. Unknowingly, so much time had passed since they had been in the Bloodground Abyss. If she had the chance, she would really like to go back with Beichen and have a look. You don't have to be so polite, we're all friends. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was light and pleasant to the ear. When she thought about how they had left the Tiangang sect 2 years ago without knowing the future and how they had all become disciples of the Tiangang sect, her heart was filled with joy. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang, who didn't feel like she had done anything great, Yuan Jixin and Yuan Xiaoman looked at each other and smiled. Their big boss was like that. She had clearly done something that they were deeply grateful towards, yet she felt that it was nothing. However, it was this kind of big boss that they were willing to give up everything for. This was boss's charm. Di Beichen glanced at the cultivators present. Apart from Bailey Hongzhuang, there were a total of 10 people present. Since everyone is here, let's go in. Di Beichen's voice was gentle and dignified. In front of Hongzhuang, he was always gentle, but in front of other practitioners, he had to show the dignity of a young sect leader. As Bailey Hongzhuang's words fell, Xia Jiqing and the others were stunned. From today onwards, they were disciples of Tiangang sect. This day was of great significance to them. Although Di Beichen had always been a friend in his eyes, this was Tiangang sect, and Di Beichen was their young sect master. Therefore, their attitude could not be as casual as before, at least in front of others. Bailey Hongzhuang quietly walked into the team. From today on, she was also a new disciple of Tiangang sect. Everything needed to be done well. Chapter 1792. The next moment, Di Beichen directly took Bailey Hongzhuang's hand and pulled her out of the team and immediately walked towards the top of Tiangang sect. Looking at Di Beichen's actions, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be stunned and whispered, "Beichen, now the entire Tiangang sect already knows that you are my wife. It is too late for you to pretend now." Di Beichen's tone was overbearing and gentle. He promised Hongzhuang that he would treat her like an ordinary cultivator when he was cultivating. However, he did not promise to hide their identity. Therefore, Hongzhuang was indeed an ordinary disciple of Tiangang sect, but she was also Di Beichen's wife. Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. Didn't Di Beichen promise her before that he would treat her like an ordinary disciple? In addition to the time of cultivation, you are my wife on weekdays. Di Beichen said again. When his voice fell, Di Beichen no longer said anything, and just walked with Hongzhuang. After seeing Di Beichen's overbearing appearance, Xia Jiqing and others showed a smile on their faces. Di Beichen is really good to the boss. Now the entire Tian gang sect already knows that the boss is Di Beichen's wife. Xia Jiqing's eyes were filled with joy. Seeing that the relationship between the boss and Di Beichen was so good, she was really happy for the boss. I don't know when a young sect master and the boss will get married. Yuan Xiaoman raised an eyebrow. With the relationship between the young sect master and the boss so good, it should be a matter of course to get married. It should be soon. In fact, the boss and the young sect master have already been married before, but the identity of the young sect master at that time is different from the current one, so the previous one doesn't seem to count. After hearing Yuan Xiaoman's address to Di Beichun, Xia Jiqing also changed the address. If she directly called Di Beichen's name in Tian gang sect, it seemed to be too disrespectful to the young sect master. Hearing this, Yuan Xiaoman suddenly understood. When the young sect master and the boss went to the Yuan family together, they all thought that the boss and the young sect master were newlyweds. She didn't know much about the boss's previous affairs, but as long as she knew that good things were coming, it was enough. I don't know if the sect master is as satisfied with the boss, and the great elder knows that Han Xiling is dead. He will definitely not give up. Yuan Xiaoman was a little worried, but judging from the situation when the boss came to pick them up, things shouldn't be as bad as she thought. Xia Jiqing's eyes also sank. She had long known that the great elder was unscrupulous. She was afraid that the boss would inevitably encounter trouble after coming to Tiangang sect. However, Xia Jiqing sect master's eyes. With the young sect master's love for the boss, he should not let the great elder bully the boss. Although Gong Shaoqing and the others did not speak, they were also worried about the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang. They all knew in their hearts that if it were not for Bailey Hongzhuang, they would still be passers-by. Gong Shaoqing and Dongfang, you remembered the time when they first met Bailey Hongzhuang, and now they only felt that all the changes were really not small. In fact, when they saw Hongzhuang for the first time, they had a feeling that she was different from the rest. Hongzhuang was born to be the kind of woman who attracted the attention of everyone. As long as she appeared, people would unconsciously be attracted to her. Chapter 1793. Behind Xia Jiqing and the others, Pan Zimo and Dong Honyun couldn't help but look at each other. After seeing that Di Beichen was so good to Bailey Hongzhuang, their hearts were full of shock. Although they already knew the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, now that they saw how much Di Beichen doted on Bailey Hongzhuang, they couldn't help but be speechless. As early as the end of the assessment, Di Beichen personally went to pick up Bailey Hongzhuang. This scene made everyone surprised. In the past, they were also proud, but in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master, they didn't have the capital to be proud. Dong Honyun couldn't help but rejoice. After knowing the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, he apologized in time and was forgiven by Bailey Hongzhuang. If that was the case, the only path left for him was death. Thinking that Han Xiling died in the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang, but the young sect master was still so good to Bailey Hongzhuang. Just this point, it could be seen that Bailey Hongzhuang's extraordinary status. Fortunately, Bailey Hongzhuang was not a vengeful person. Now he was also full of gratitude to Bailey Hongzhuang. Under the circumstances at that time, if Bailey Hongzhuang was not willing to forgive him, this was also very normal. Pan Zimo's mood was also very good. Before participating in the assessment, he was looking forward to the day when he could enter Tiangang sect. Now, this dream had really come true. Thinking of the various things he had in the dynasty a few days ago, he really felt that his hard work for such a long time was worth it. He also felt fortunate that he met Mo Yunjue and the others at that time. Otherwise, he was afraid that he might not have such a good result now. Cheng Hefeng and Yu Junfei were both disciples of Tiangang sect. Cheng Hefeng was in the top 10. At that time, when he was choosing a sect, he chose Tiangang sect. Speaking of which, all of this was really a coincidence. Except for Shi Cairong, the four of them had interacted with Bailey Hongzhuang before. As early as at the end of the assessment, when he saw the scene of Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang hugging each other, Cheng Hefeng felt lucky that he didn't fall out with Bailey Hongzhuang at that time. Otherwise, in that case, he could only go to other sections. After all, if he offended the young sect master's wife, how could he have a good result if he stayed in the sect to cultivate? Originally, He didn't understand how Bailey Hongzhuang could become a sealing master with her strength. Now that he knew the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, he completely understood. With Bailey Hongzhuang's identity, it wasn't strange for her to become a sealing master. Some of the geniuses in sects couldn't be judged by common sense. Even if they were of the same age, the cultivators in sects were usually much stronger than them. Yu Junfei didn't know what to say. He only felt that Fang Wensheng was right to die. If he didn't die in the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang, he would have died in the hands of a young sect master after the assessment. At this moment, he finally understood. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't participate in the assessment as a small empire's team. They were clearly the same team as Han Shiling's team. They were only separated into two teams because of the conflict between the two parties. Probably many people didn't understand this point. It was because everyone didn't know that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others pretended to be pigs to eat tigers all the way until the end. They were simply too shrewd. Chapter 1794. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others arrived at Tiangang Zone. Xia Jiqing and the others had already been to Tiangang Zone and were no stranger to the situation here. Cheng Huffing and the others were obviously coming to Tiangang Zone for the first time, so they were full of curiosity and shock for everything in front of them. They had long heard of the vastness and extraordinariness of the sect, but imagination was always imagination. Only when they saw it with their own eyes would they know what a magnificent scene it was. Look, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of friends really became cultivators of our Tiangang Zone. They're also very powerful. None of them were injured, and all of them came back safely. Not only that, their rankings are very good. You really can't judge a book by its cover. The cultivators of Tiangang Zone looked at Xia Jiqing and the others. 2 years ago, they only thought that after Xia Jiqing and the others left, they would never come back alive. After all, they all understood the cruelty of the assessment competition. If they were not strong enough, they would only have a dead end if they participated. They were not optimistic about the strength of the Kangling College's group of cultivators because the gap was too big. However, now that they saw them return safely, although everyone felt that it was a little difficult to accept, they still respected them a little more in their hearts. At least, compared to the time when they were completely relying on Bailey Hongzhuang's relationship to come here. Now they had proven that they did have the strength. For many cultivators, what they most disliked was to rely on relationships to get the status they had worked so hard for so long before, because this would make them have a strong sense of imbalance in their hearts. But if the other party also had the same strength, then they would not be so repulsed as before. The remarks of the surrounding cultivators were not missed by Xia Jiqing and the others. Compared to the remarks 2 years ago, the words they heard at the moment were undoubtedly more pleasing to the ears. Thinking of this, everyone smiled at each other. Sure enough, standing here with their own strength had a completely different experience. Now these guys don't dare to laugh at us anymore. Xia Jiqing's face was filled with a proud smile. When they first listened to the slander of other cultivators, they also had a breath of resentment in their hearts. Fortunately, now all of this had been solved. Dongfang Yu's peach blossom eyes curved into a charming arc. Why bother with what others say? Just be yourself. At this time, Di Beichen looked at Xiao Ingze and said, "Second Elder, I'll have to trouble you to take them to the conference hall. The 4 hall masters should already be waiting." Hearing this, Xiao Ingze respectfully bowed. "Yes, then I will take them to the conference hall now." Di Beichen glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile. "You can choose the branch palace that you want to cultivate. I will not accompany you there." Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly and smiled sweetly. "I understand." Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's bright smile, Di Beichen's eyes lit up. Even though he had been with Hongzhuang for such a long time, every time she smiled, he would be stunned. He thought that he had been poisoned by a poison called Hongzhuang. However, he was willing to endure it. "Now everyone follow me to the conference hall." After leaving a sentence, Xiao Ingze walked in the direction of the conference hall. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also followed behind Xiao Ingze. Chapter 1795. After Di Beichen left, Xia Jiqing went to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. However, because the second elder was in front and they were about to go to the conference hall, she did not dare to pull Hong Zhuang to say anything else. After the report was completed, she could have a good chat with her boss about what had happened during this period of time. Gong Xiaoqing and the others followed closely behind Bailey Hongzhuang, while Cheng Huffing's group of 4 walked at the back. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had such a good relationship with the cultivators in her team, they couldn't help but feel sad. The cultivators in her team were a group of extremely lucky guys. Under the leadership of the second elder, after walking for a while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also arrived at the conference hall. Xiaoyingzhen knocked on the door of the conference hall. After hearing the sound coming from the door, he pushed open the door of the conference hall and walked in with the new disciples. In their line of sight, they saw the 4 palace masters sitting on the seats on both sides. With the appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, the eyes of the 4 palace masters fell on them. Feeling the eyes of the palace masters, Xia Jiqing and the others all held their breath and showed a serious look on their faces. The eyes of the 4 palace masters looked at everyone. This time, Tiangang Sec had recruited 12 cultivators in the top 100 of the assessment competition. This number was already very good. After all, the strength of the top 10 sects was not weak. Most of the time, each sect had 10 people. This time, the young sect master personally came out, and the effect was really different. The second elder's voice sounded. The work of the great elder had now fallen on her. Tiangang sect is divided into 4 halls, namely Azure Dragon Hall, White Tiger Hall, Vermilion Bird Hall, and Black Tortoise Hall. This is the Azure Dragon Hall Master, Yin Kaicheng. This is the White Tiger Hall Master, Qi Han. This is the Vermilion Bird Hall Master, Qin Ai. This is the Black Tortoise Hall Master, Gu Jingqing. The second elder introduced the identities of the 4 palace masters to the new disciples. All the disciples of Tiangang sect would cultivate in these 4 halls. The strength of the 4 halls was similar, and there was competition. In Tiangang sect, there would be a competition between the 4 halls every once in a while. With competition, there was motivation. This was also implemented in the sect. This was because once there was no competition, the cultivator would naturally not feel nervous and would gradually become lazy. Listening to the second elder's introduction, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, one after another, they bowed and said, "Greetings to the 4 palace masters." Today, Bailey Hongzhuang was a lot more indifferent when facing the 4 palace lords. When she first met the 4 palace lords, she was still very worried. But now this feeling had obviously disappeared. The Azure Dragon Hall Master Xiao Hongzhen and the White Tiger Hall Master Jiang, he had already disappeared from the Tiangang sect. As for how the sovereign dealt with them, Bailey Hongzhuang did not ask. However, she only needed to know that their ending would definitely not be good. Yin Kaicheng and Qi Han were the 2 palace masters chosen by the sect master. The strength and influence of these 2 people were very clear. Of course, these 2 people were completely on the sect master and young sect master side and did not have any disloyalty. Chapter 1796. The 4 palace masters were just sitting there, but everyone could feel a heavy pressure. That was the aura that belonged to a superior person. The momentum that was cultivated by being in a high position for many years was something that ordinary people could not possess. Therefore, when facing the 4 palace masters, they could not help but feel weak. There was a faint smile on the faces of the 4 palace masters. It just so happened that there were 12 disciples. Each of the 4 palace masters would get 3, so it was more fair. You have a total of 12 disciples here. Every 3 people will enter a palace. You can choose by yourselves. Once you have chosen, stand in front of us. Qin Ai's face was filled with a kind smile, and his voice was gentle and majestic. The cultivation of the top 100 in the assessment competition was very good. They were all good seedlings that could be cultivated well in each palace. Because the number of new disciples was relatively small, they still had to compete with each other. The current situation where the number of people could be divided equally was undoubtedly what they hoped for the most. After all, they were still hall masters. It would be unsightly for them to fight over outstanding seedlings to the point where their faces were flushed red, even though they were often like this in private. As Qin Ai's voice fell, Xia Jiqing and the others looked at each other. Obviously, this situation was somewhat beyond their expectations. You can discuss it. If you have a good relationship, you can enter a palace. Don't be too nervous. Yin Kaicheng smiled indifferently. The rankings of the cultivators in this assessment competition were very high. Therefore, they were not worried about who would join their palace. Xia Jiqing walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side and said, "Boss, I will go to whichever palace you go to." In Xia Jiqing's heart, this kind of problem did not need her to consider at all. No matter which palace boss went to, she would follow. From the past to the present, she had never intended to be separated from boss. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. She knew that Jiqing would definitely be with her. As for which palace she would go to, she had also thought about it. She chose the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Not only her, but her grandfather and Di Bei-chan were also very much in agreement. Among the 4 palace masters, only Qin Ai and Gu Jingqing knew that she was her grandfather's granddaughter. The other 2 palace masters did not know. It wasn't that Tian didn't trust Yin Kaicheng and Qing Han, but the fewer people who knew about this, the better. Once more people knew about it, the possibility of the news being leaked would increase. Moreover, she would be going to Limitless Palace to cultivate 3 months later. If you were to cultivate under other palace masters, it would undoubtedly be extremely inconvenient. However, in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, this was clearly not a problem. After hearing Xia Jiqing's words, Bai Junyu also walked to Xia Jiqing's side and said, "Hongzhuang, Jiqing, I am in the same hall as you." Xia Jiqing subconsciously glanced at Bai Junyu. When she heard that Bai Junyu was going to cultivate in the same hall as her, she couldn't help but feel a little happy. At the very least, Bai Junyu did not choose to cultivate in the same place as Yuan Xiaoman, but chose to cultivate in the same place as her. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled at Bai Junyu. It seemed that Bai Junyu's feelings for Jiqing had not changed at all. After they cultivated together in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, it was time to break through this layer of window paper. Although this matter would make Xiaoman sad, Bailey Hongzhuang believed that Xiaoman would definitely find the happiness that truly belonged to her. Chapter 1797. When Yuan Xiaoman saw that Bai Junyu had chosen to cultivate in the same hall as Xia Jiqing, her eyes were filled with sadness. Did this mean that Xia Jiqing was always the one who occupied the most weight in Bai Junyu's heart? She and Jiqing were good friends, and she never had the idea of competing with Jiqing for a sweetheart. All the choices were Bai Junyu's. If Bai Junyu chose her, she would be happy. But if Bai Junyu chose Xia Jiqing, she would also give her blessings. No matter what, they were great friends. Yuan Jixin also noticed the change in Yuan Xiaoman's expression. He knew about Xiaoman's feelings for Bai Junyu. Although Yuan Xiaoman was usually carefree, as if she didn't care about anything, he and Xiaoman grew up together, so he knew that this was the first time Xiaoman liked someone. Thinking about it, the first time you liked someone but was rejected, this feeling must be very uncomfortable. As Xiaoman's brother, he could only comfort her. Yuan Jixin patted Yuan Xiaoman's shoulder, only hoping that she wouldn't be too sad because of this. At least, her brother had always been by her side. Feeling Yuan Jixin's care, Yuan Xiaoman pulled a smile on her face and shook her head at Yuan Jixin, indicating that she was fine. Because Yuan Jixin and Yuan Xiaoman would definitely cultivate together, and Gong Xiaoqing and Dong Fangyu, who had been good brothers for so many years, would naturally not be separated. Therefore, the grouping was quickly determined. Bailey Hongzhuang, Xia Jiqing, and Bai Junyu stood in front of Qin Ai together. Qin Ai smiled slightly. He had already known that Bailey Hongzhuang would come to his team. Not to mention Bailey Hongzhuang's identity as the granddaughter of the sovereign. Just the first place of the assessment, Bailey Hongzhuang came to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. He would definitely train her well. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 bowed to Qin Ai. In the future, they would follow Hall Master Qin. Gong Xiaoqing, Dong Fangyu, and Pan Zimo stood in front of Yin Kaicheng. They chose the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. It just so happened that the three men were very suitable to cultivate in the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. Yuan Jixin, Yuan Xiaoman, and Dong Hongyan chose White Tiger Hall. Compared to Cheng Hefeng and the others, they were more familiar with Dong Hongyan. Although they once had a conflict with Dong Hongyan, all the conflicts had vanished into thin air. Moreover, Dong Hongyan had helped them in the past, so they had a good impression of Dong Hongyan. Cheng Hefeng, Yu Junfei, and Shi Cairong remained in the Black Tortoise Hall. The four hall masters nodded their heads in satisfaction when they saw that everyone had quickly chosen their respective sub-halls. Today is everyone's first day of reporting. After confirming your respective training halls, there won't be any problems. Later, when you go to your respective branch halls, the elders will tell you where you will live in the future. Cultivate well in the branch halls, Yin Kaiching said slowly. Yes, Bailey Hongzhuang replied. Although you have defeated many opponents to become a member of Tiangang sect, don't think that you can relax after coming here. Here, your cultivation life has just begun. If you don't cultivate well and improve, then you will also be eliminated by Tiangang sect. The results you obtained in the assessment competition are indeed very good, but here, there are countless cultivators who are more outstanding and more talented than you. Chapter 1798. The White Tiger Hall Master, Qi Han, was more solemn. Every time a new disciple joined the Tiangang sect, he had to sound the alarm. After obtaining very good results in the assessment competition, these young people were bound to endure all kinds of flattery and fawning after returning home. In this way, many cultivators would lose their nature and think that they were outstanding enough. However, such thinking was absolutely not allowed in the Tiangang sect. The Tiangang sect itself was a place where the survival of the fittest prevailed. Compared to the environment these cultivators lived in previously, this place was even crueler. As long as one's strength was not strong enough, they would be the target of everyone's ridicule. He wanted to tell all the new disciples that in this place, they had to rein in their previous pride and complacency. In this place, they were newcomers who had nothing. Following Qi Han's words, Gong Shaoqing and the others' hearts all trembled. The original joy and pride in their hearts were shattered with these words. During this period of time, their hearts had indeed been somewhat complacent because of their recent results. At this moment, after hearing Qi Han's words, they could not help but start to examine themselves. Even if they obtained good results in the assessment competition, they were probably at the bottom of the Tiangang sect. This was because many cultivators in the Tiangang sect were selected from the assessment competition. In addition, the previous cultivators had already stayed in the Tiangang sect to cultivate for such a long time. They really could not compare with the other party in any aspect. Understood. Everyone's faces were filled with seriousness. From now on, they had to let go of everything in the past and cultivate humbly and seriously. Qi Han's gaze swept across everyone. After seeing that everyone had an appearance of humbly accepting his teachings, he also revealed a satisfied expression. If the new disciples did not sound the alarm when they arrived at the sect, they would inevitably cause some trouble in the following period of time. They had all seen this before. Chapter 1799. After the four hall masters finished their speech, they stood up and left the assembly hall. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also followed the palace lords they had chosen and walked out. Boss, we'll go to White Tiger Hall first. When we have time, we'll come and find you. Yuan Xiaoman walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. She hadn't seen her boss for more than 2 months and originally wanted to talk to her more. She didn't expect that they were actually cultivating in different halls. Although they all belonged to Tiangang sect, it wouldn't be so easy to see each other often in the future. Tiangang sect's area was very large, and different halls were on different peaks. Although they could come and go, the distance wasn't close. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. The future is long. We'll all be in Tiangang sect and have many opportunities to meet. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Yuan Xiaoman also revealed a happy smile. Okay, although it's a pity that we can't cultivate in the same hall, but boss, I'll definitely work hard to cultivate. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. You can still see each other often. Come and find us often. Gong Xiaoqing and Dong Fengyu also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Dong Fengyu was as bright and handsome as ever. Hongzhuang, I wanted to ask you how you've been in Tiangang sect during this period of time, but now there's no chance. Next time, let's find a chance to get together. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and smiled faintly. No problem, just come and find us. Qing Yifeng also couldn't help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang. In Tiangang sect, Bailey Hongzhuang was really a doted existence. As early as the end of the assessment competition, Bailey Hongzhuang already knew that Cheng Yifeng and Yu Junfei were also Tiangang sect's disciples. She also felt a wave of amazement towards this miraculous fate. Although she almost fought with Cheng Yifeng and Yu Junfei before, in the end, the conflict didn't develop to the maximum. Bailey Hongzhuang also had some admiration for Cheng Yifeng. After all, there were not many cultivators who were as smart and magnanimous as Cheng Yifeng. Being a smiling tiger was also one of his abilities. If it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to do what Cheng Yifeng did. Cheng Yifeng smiled politely at Bailey Hongzhuang, as if nothing had happened during the assessment. As the saying goes, don't slap a smiling person. Cheng Yifeng had always been very thorough about this point. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also nodded. Now, they were all disciples of Tiangang sect. Compared to the situation of absolute competition in the past, they were now in the same team. Therefore, there was no need for a tit-for-tat. When Yu Junfei saw Cheng Yifeng's reaction, he felt both jealousy and admiration. It had to be said that Cheng Yifeng's way of dealing with people was watertight. In this aspect, he could not compare to Cheng Yifeng. Soon, the four hall masters headed in 4 different directions. Bailey Hongzhuang, Xia Jiqing, and Bai Junyu followed behind Qin Ai and walked in the direction of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Although they had all been to Tiangang sect, they hadn't been to the 4 main halls and didn't know what the situation was like. Bailey Hongzhuang had been staying in Tiangang sect these days, but she hadn't been to other places except for Di Beichen's palace. Naturally, she didn't know where the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was. Chapter 1800. Along the way, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 followed behind Qin Ai and looked at the environment of Tiangang sect. Now it seemed that Tiangang sect really had a different world. The size of the area was really amazing. Along the way, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 did not communicate. After all, they were very afraid of the palace master in front of them. In the process of going to Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 also met a lot of disciples who were coming here. All the disciples would bow and greet Qin Ai when they saw him. However, Qin Ai still had an indifferent and amiable look on his face. The eyes of the crowd of disciples couldn't help but fall on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2. Today was the day when the new disciples reported, and everyone was very familiar with the process. At this moment, looking at the situation, they knew that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 would be cultivators of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall in the future. I didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to choose Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Palace Master Qin's temper has always been very good. It's not strange that Bailey Hongzhuang came to Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. It seems that Bailey Hongzhuang did not use her privileges and intends to cultivate in Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. That's not necessarily true. We have to see Bailey Hongzhuang's performance later to know. I think that since Bailey Hongzhuang has been confirmed to be the future wife of the young sect master, she probably doesn't need to work so hard. As early as Bailey Hongzhuang had been staying in Di Beichen's palace, many disciples thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was likely to follow the young sect master to cultivate in the future and would not go to one of the 4 main halls to cultivate. Now looking at the situation in front of them, they knew that their previous guesses were wrong. The real situation was not like this. Xia Jiqing listened to everyone's discussion and could not help but frown. It seemed that everyone still had a lot of guesses and doubts about the boss. The speed of Qin Ai and Bailey Hongzhuang and the others was not slow. After a long while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others finally arrived at Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. A huge palace appeared in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2, magnificent and spectacular. At a glance, no one would think that this was just a side hall. My God, Vermilion Bird Palace Hall is so big, it's shocking. Xia Jiqing's face was filled with shock. She knew that Tiangang's sect had always been big, but the situation in front of her was a bit too amazing. Such a large hall was only one of the 4 main halls. Didn't this mean that the other 3 halls were also of the same size? I wouldn't have imagined it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. We'll be cultivating here in the future. It looks pretty good. The corner of Bai Junyu's mouth held a trace of a faint smile. When he first saw this vermilion bird palace hall, he had a feeling of yearning. Thinking that he would be cultivating here in the future, he couldn't help but feel happy. Bailey Hongzhuang also had some feelings in her heart. This was the heritage of the sect. Compared to 1,000 years ago, the sect today was undoubtedly more magnificent, giving people a sense of shock. In the center of this palace, there were 3 big words written in flamboyant calligraphy. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Although it was only 3 words, from these words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 could feel an indescribable sense of sharpness. There was sword intent condensed in these words. After staring at these words for a long time, they only felt a pain in their eyes and could not continue to look at it. After seeing the reaction of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, Qin AI also introduced it. Chapter 1801. Listening to Qin AI's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2's eyes were filled with shock. The first sect master of Tiangang's sect. Tiangang's sect had been passed down for many years, and the first sect master existed many years ago. However, those who were the first to establish a sect were usually the most talented people. To open up a sect in an environment where there were so many sects, the process was definitely difficult and not simple. The first sect master's swordsmanship must be extremely powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed. How much understanding of the sword did he have to be able to integrate the sword intent into the words? Qin AI smiled and nodded. Her expression was full of admiration and reverence. The first sect master's swordsmanship was indeed superb, and no one could compare to him. Even in the history books of Tiangang's sect, it was recorded that the first sect master's swordsmanship was fierce. The reason why the first sect master was able to open up the sect was because of his swordsmanship. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 also showed admiration. If there was no first sect master, then there would not be the current Tiangang sect. In the sect, many disciples who practice swordsmanship often come to look at this plaque and comprehend the sword intent in the words. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was a little surprised. We can rely on these words to comprehend the sword intent. Yes, the first sect master integrated the sword intent into the words in order to let the disciples of the sect benefit infinitely. In this way, any cultivator who practices swordsmanship can comprehend from these words. 100 years ago, there was a disciple who understood the sword intent in the words of my Tiangang sect. His swordsmanship was unparalleled among the younger generation of cultivators. He got the true inheritance of the first sect master. With Qin AI's voice falling, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2's eyes looking at the plaque had changed. They never thought that the words in the plaque turned out to be a kind of inheritance. It was really unexpected. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu didn't know what to say at the moment. They always felt that after coming to Tiangang's sect, they had a feeling of being country people entering a city. Everything here showed a strong and deep foundation. There was not a single thing they could casually ignore. After noticing the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2, the smile in Qin AI's eyes deepened. She said, after you have stayed in Tiangang's sect for a long time, you will know all of this. Now, report to the resource elder. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 looked in the direction that Qin AI was pointing at and noticed that there was an elder not far away. Thank you, Palace Master. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 thanked Qin AI for her guidance. Naturally, the Hall Master would not be in charge of their living arrangements. It was already an honor for the Palace Master to lead them to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall on the first day of reporting. It should be known that it was extremely difficult for cultivators to meet the Palace Master. As long as nothing major happened in the sub-palace, the Palace Master would not appear. Qin AI slowly disappeared from the sight of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2. Only then did they turn around and walk towards the resource elder. Greetings to the elder. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two respectfully bowed. We are the new disciples who came to report today. The elder then looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. After noticing Bailey Hongzhuang, his eyes changed a bit and then he smiled. Chapter 1802. The key to your room, the disciple uniform, and the sect manual are all in the Chinquin bag. You can take a look at it yourself. The place where the disciples of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall live. After you enter the hall, turn left, and each room has a number written on it. All you need to do is to enter your own house according to the house number. If there is still something you don't understand, come and ask me. The resource elder said aloud. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two took the Chinquin bag and immediately knew the room they lived in. Thank you, elder. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two bowed again. As far as they were concerned, there was nothing they didn't understand. The elder nodded slightly, and Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two left. The inside of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was also very bright. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two went to the left according to the elder's instructions. The scope of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was very large. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked to the place where the disciples lived, they found that the number of rooms here was really not small. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two found their respective rooms. Fortunately, because the three of them came to Vermilion Bird Palace Hall to report together, their rooms were also adjacent. Haha, our rooms are connected. It will be convenient in the future. Xia Jiqing's face was full of excitement. She had made up her mind to be together with the boss. If they lived far away, or if they didn't practice together, it would undoubtedly make her depressed. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. This feeling is similar to when we were in Azure Water College. Thinking back to when they were in Azure Water College, the three of them also lived on the first floor of the special enrollment dormitory. Now, the situation was exactly the same and had not changed. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu looked at each other and smiled. After Hongzhuang said this, they really felt that the situation was very similar. Bailey Hongzhuang opened the door and saw that the room also had everything and the treatment was very good. Compared to the living environment in Azure Water College, it seemed to be better here. No wonder so many cultivators are racking their brains to enter the sect. This treatment is indeed excellent. Bai Junyu sighed faintly. Living here was the dream life of many cultivators. We'll be living here for a long time in the future. The environment is pretty good. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and smiled. This place was spacious enough for her to place an alchemy furnace or draw inscriptions. In comparison, the dormitory of the Azure Water School was not as big as this one. As for some daily necessities, they had already prepared them in their Chinquin bags, so they only needed to tidy up a little before they could move in. Xia Jiqing did not enter her room, but followed Bailey Hongzhuang into her room. Boss, how have you been in Tiangang's sect these days? Xia Jiqing asked with concern. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. I'm doing pretty well here, just like you guys. To her now, Tiangang's sect was her home. That was because her grandfather was here. Her grandfather was the only relative she had found in the world. Xia Jiqing, who was still a little worried, couldn't help but feel relieved after hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words. The Great Elder didn't embarrass you? I always feel that the Great Elder is not easy to deal with. Chapter 1803. Feeling Xia Jiqing's concern for her, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but hold Xia Jiqing's hand. Her beautiful face was filled with a gentle and touched smile. On the first day I came to Tiangang's sect, the Great Elder did come to trouble me. As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing couldn't help but show a nervous look. I said that the Great Elder is not an easy person to deal with. He will definitely come to trouble you. Don't worry, the Great Elder is now in confinement. Otherwise, what you saw just now would not be the second Elder, but the Great Elder. Xia Jiqing frowned, and there was a bit of joy in her eyes, but more of it was astonishment. The Great Elder is in confinement? Did the young sect master do it? Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head slightly. The sect master ordered it. It is estimated that he will not come out in a short time, so you don't need to worry. Xia Jiqing's expression tightened, and she approached Bailey Hongzhuang her eyes full of curiosity and joy. Boss, has the sect master already agreed to you and the young sect master being together? Anyway, now that Han Shieling is gone, no one is your competitor. The young sect master likes you so much, the sect master should not object anymore, right? Since the fall of Han Shieling, Xia Jiqing felt that the path of the boss was much smoother. After all, Han Shieling was a big stumbling block. What's more, the sect master's attitude towards the boss was also good. Obviously, there was no dissatisfaction. The sect master did not object. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Now her grandfather was very satisfied with her and Beichen together, and only hoped that they could get married soon. Whether it was her, Beichen, or her grandfather, they all decided to hold the wedding after they rescued their parents. That's great. Xia Jiqing was overjoyed. This was undoubtedly excellent news. Now that the great elder is in confinement, there is no way to destroy you and the young sect master. It seems that it won't be long before the boss becomes the young sect master's wife. Looking at Xia Jiqing's happy appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but smile. Now, there were no obstacles between her and Beichen. Compared to the heaviness when she first came to Tiangang's sect, the current result was undoubtedly much better. There were still 2 hurdles in front of them that needed to be crossed. She hoped that everything could be crossed like this, one by one. Bailey Hongzhuang then looked at Xia Jiqing. There was no problem between her and Beichen now, but the problem between Jiqing and Junyu seemed to have not been resolved. "How are you and Junyu now?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Xia Jiqing's expression, which was originally full of joy, suddenly stiffened and fell into silence. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang understood. She sighed. Bai Junyu and Xia Jiqing were usually talkative people, but when it came to this kind of thing, the two of them could only remain silent. In this regard, she also felt a burst of helplessness. After a long while, Xia Jiqing's voice lowered a bit and said, "Junyu, you should like Xiaoman." She always felt that Bai Junyu and Yuan Xiaoman would have a lot of common topics together, and they would be more comfortable getting along. Yuan Xiaoman was a person who couldn't hide her thoughts on her face. Everyone could see that she liked Bai Junyu. Now, she only felt that she might be an obstacle between them. Chapter 1804. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Xia Jiqing's lost appearance and couldn't help but feel distressed. When they were at the Kanglan College, Xia Jiqing obviously didn't have any thoughts about Bai Junyu. However, after getting along for such a long time, she felt that Xia Jiqing had gradually begun to like Bai Junyu. Women understood women's minds more. Not to mention, she and Jiqing had been sisters for several years, and she was also very familiar with the changes in Jiqing's mood. Since Junyu chose to cultivate with us in the same hall, it proves that the person in his heart is you. Don't belittle yourself. Bailey Hongzhuang said, "Men's thoughts have always been very simple. If Bai Junyu liked Yuan Xiaoman, then Bai Junyu would definitely choose to be in a group with Yuan Xiaoman, not with him. Bai Junyu's thoughts have been proven by his actions." Xia Jiqing shook her head. "Even if he chooses to cultivate with us in the same hall, it doesn't necessarily prove that he has me in his heart. On weekdays, he clearly prefers to get along with Xiaoman. These days, she had been paying attention. When Bai Junyu was with her, he clearly didn't talk as much as he did with Yuan Xiaoman, and they got along more naturally. It was precisely because of this that she became more and more unconfident. In fact, Xiaoman's appearance was outstanding, and her family background and strength were better than hers. It was normal for Bai Junyu to like Yuan Xiaoman. Seeing that Xia Jiqing had been changing the topic, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but frown. "Jiqing, don't always deny Junyu's feelings for you, and always think that Junyu's approach to Xiaoman is true. If you continue to do this, you will only become more and more unconfident. Think about it carefully. Isn't Junyu more special to you?" Bailey Hongzhuang felt a burst of helplessness. Whenever a woman really liked a man, she would often become like this. Xia Jiqing clearly didn't believe her. Xia Jiqing shook her head, inexplicably irritated. Now she increasingly felt that Bai Junyu didn't like her. However, immersed in such a mood, her mood was also very bad. You only see Junyu and Xiaoman chatting well. Why don't you say that you also chat well with Dongfang? However, once you're in front of Junyu, you don't know what to say. Junyu is very likely to be in the same situation as you. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed faintly. At times like this, many onlookers could see more clearly. It was precisely because they were just friends that they got along so well that there was no need to worry about other problems. And once you stand in front of the person you like, you will unconsciously feel nervous, worrying about how you should behave so that the other party won't hate you, so that the other party will have a better impression of you. Because most of his emotions were immersed in this place, he would be particularly passive when interacting with others, and he would speak less. In her opinion, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu belonged to such a situation. As long as this window paper was not broken, this problem would continue to exist. She really admired the endurance of Bai Junyu, Xia Jiqing, and Yuan Xiaoman. Struggling under such circumstances was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Yet, they were able to continue walking like this. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xia Jiqing was shocked. Chapter 1805. If this was the case, then did it mean that the person Bai Junyu liked was still her? Xia Jiqing's heart couldn't help but beat faster. During this time, she felt more and more that Bai Junyu and Yuan Xiaoman were a real couple. Sometimes, she even wanted to quit. However, Bai Junyu often appeared in front of her, and she couldn't just let it go. It had been 3 years since she knew Bai Junyu. Since they met at the Kanglan College, Bai Junyu had always been by her side. She clearly remembered the scene of the first time she met Bai Junyu. She still remembered Bai Junyu's expression at that time. It was just that unknowingly, things had come to this. She didn't know when things began to develop like this, but the current situation was really not what she wanted to see. Noticing the change in Xia Jiqing's expression, Bailey Hongzhuang knew that she had understood a little. All of this depended on Bai Junyu's thoughts. Now that Yuan Xiaoman was not in the White Tiger Hall, if Bai Junyu still did not take any action, then she had to talk to Bai Junyu. Originally, she didn't want to intervene too much, so she didn't say much. If the situation had reached a situation where she had to say something, then for the happiness of her good sister, she decided to say something. In this way, whether it was for Xia Jiqing or Yuan Xiaoman, it was excellent. Bailey Hongzhuang patted Xia Jiqing's shoulder and said, "Think about it." Xia Jiqing looked deeply at Bailey Hongzhuang, then nodded. "Okay." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly, then picked up the sect manual and looked at it. It recorded their cultivation process and what they needed to do in the Vermilion Bird Hall. Only after understanding all this, they knew what to do next. Bailey Hongzhuang carefully looked at everything recorded in the manual. After 3 days, they could go to the martial arts field of the Vermilion Bird Hall to cultivate in the morning. In Tiangang's sect, the activities of the cultivators were relatively free. The martial arts field was divided into 2 parts. One was the sitting area, and the other was the martial arts field. The meditation field was the place where the disciples cultivated together, while the martial arts field was the place where the cultivators exchanged pointers and practiced their martial skills. Normally, most of the cultivators would cultivate in the cultivation field, because the cultivation fields of the 4 major branch palaces all had a special barrier. Cultivating there, the essence energy would be denser, and the cultivator's strength would also increase faster. Similarly, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall also had 2 rankings. One was the cultivation ranking, which recorded the cultivation of all the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples. One was the combat prowess ranking, which recorded the combat prowess of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples. Cultivation and combat strength were not the same. Even among cultivators of the same cultivation, there would be a certain difference in combat strength. These 2 lists were usually placed on the training field, and anyone who came here would be able to see them. It was precisely because of this that the cultivators at the bottom would definitely feel humiliated. This method could also promote the cultivation of the disciples. After all, when everyone around you was working hard to cultivate while you were the only one who remained stagnant, even you would feel ashamed of yourself. Looking at these 2 lists, cultivators would clearly know their ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Chapter 1806. In addition, in Tiangang sect, there was a place to receive cultivation resources called the Resource Hall. Every month, cultivators could go to the resource hall to receive their own resources. These cultivation resources were often resources such as medicinal pills. With these resources, a cultivator's cultivation speed would be much faster than usual. The reason why all the cultivators in Shangxian continent wanted to become a member of the sect was because of the rich spirit energy here. Cultivating in the rich spirit energy would have twice the result with half the effort. Unknowingly, one could surpass the cultivation of the cultivators in the outside world. On the other hand, it was because of the rich cultivation resources in the sect. As everyone knew, medicinal pills had always been a necessity for cultivators. However, the price of medicinal pills was also very expensive. Except for some extremely rich cultivators, it was impossible for the average person to have so many cultivation resources. What's more, the alchemists in the outside world were not as good as the alchemists in the sect. In the outside world, many medicinal pills were priceless. Even if one had money, they could not buy the medicinal pills they needed. As for the rules here, they did not have to abide by many. Some places they should not go, such as the Sect Master's Palace, the Junior Sect Master's Palace, the Palace Master's Palace, and so on. As long as they did not receive an order, the conference hall was also a place they could not set foot in. In Tiangang's sect, in addition to the 4 halls, there was also the Alchemy Hall and the Inscription Hall. The number of alchemist disciples in the Alchemy Hall was also not small, and the treatment of the disciples in the Inscription Hall was even better. However, the number of disciples in the Inscription Hall was much less than the number of disciples in the Alchemy Hall. This was because the requirements to become an inscription master were higher than that of an alchemist. Here, the status of both the Alchemy Hall disciples and the Inscription Hall disciples was very high. However, the status of the disciples in the 4 halls was not bad. However, the rarer something was, the more valuable it was. This law was applicable everywhere. When Bailey Hongzhuang was looking at the sect manual, Xia Jiqing also looked at it. After understanding all this, she felt that everything here was more free. Even if they were not in the same hall, they could often go there on weekdays. Tiangang's sect was to give them a place to cultivate freely. As long as there was nothing major, the hall master would generally not come forward. It was a free-range guide. Boss, I heard from the hall master that there will be other new disciples coming to Tiangang's sect in a few days. Xia Jiqing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang suspiciously. She thought it was just them. She didn't expect there to be other cultivators. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. The scope of Tiangang's sect is so large. Although the requirements for the disciples recruited each year are high, the number of people is not too small. The assessment competition was only one way for Tiangang's sect to recruit disciples, and there were other ways. Some disciples from aristocratic families would also come to the sect to cultivate, but these disciples would not be the most outstanding disciples of the aristocratic families. Maybe it was because they couldn't get the best treatment in their families, so they came to the sect to cultivate. If they achieve outstanding results in the sect, then when they return to their family, their status will also rise by a lot. Chapter 1807. I didn't expect the pressure of the cultivators in the aristocratic families to be so big. I thought that the disciples of aristocratic families were very great. Xia Jiqing sighed faintly. It seemed that no matter who it was, they would have some troubles. She used to think that the children of aristocratic families were born with a golden spoon in their mouths. They would live a life of luxury and were not comparable to ordinary people. Now, listening to her boss's explanation, she only felt that what she thought before was too simple. Everything was not so easy. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. It is precisely because their resources are beyond the reach of others that the family's requirements for them are higher. In a cultivation aristocratic family, there would be many cultivators in the younger generation. Under the accumulation of rich and excellent resources, almost every generation would have amazing talents. On the contrary, under the same cultivation resources, the return of some children was not proportional to their efforts. Then the situation of these disciples was undoubtedly extremely bad. The bigger the family, the crueler it was. Xia Jiqing nodded slightly. The strength of those aristocratic family disciples should be stronger than us. I feel that if I don't work hard, I am afraid that I will really be at the bottom. Even if the performance of the aristocratic family disciples who came to Tiangang sect was not outstanding, compared to the cultivators who came from the grassroots, their strength should be stronger. Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and said, "It is not so absolute, but we do need to work hard. The palace lord is right. Coming to Tiangang sect is just a starting point. What kind of results we have in the future will depend on ourselves." Xia Jiqing's eyes changed a bit. She had rested for 3 months and could be said to be extremely relaxed. However, today was only the first day in Tiangang sect, and she felt an indescribable sense of tension. This feeling was as if there was a flood beast chasing after her. As long as she slacked a little, she may be swallowed into the stomach. She did not dare to not work hard. She had to work hard because she did not want to be at the bottom. Looking at Xia Jiqing's dignified expression, Bailey Hongzhuang patted her shoulder and said, "Jiqing, don't be so nervous. Your performance in the assessment competition is very good. Not to mention your talent is not bad, and your strength has improved very quickly. Back then, we also came here one by one when no one was optimistic about us. Now, the gap between us and the other cultivators is not that big. Do you still not have confidence?" After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xia Jiqing, who was originally a little tense, also relaxed a little. "Boss, you're right. I'll definitely work hard." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "I just reported in today, so I don't have much to do. Why don't we go to the resource hall to collect cultivation resources?" Obtaining cultivation resources would definitely be beneficial to their cultivation. "Sure." Xia Jiqing nodded. She was also very curious about what kind of cultivation resources the Tiangang Zone disciples would have. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and Xia Jiqing were about to leave, Bai Junyu's voice came from outside their door. "Jiqing, Hongzhuang, do you want to go to the resource hall to collect cultivation resources?" Hearing this voice, Bailey Hongzhuang and Xia Jiqing looked at each other and smiled. They immediately opened the door and went out. Chapter 1808. Bai Junyu looked at Xia Jiqing's beautiful smile and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. He always felt that the Jiqing in front of him at this moment was very different. From the end of the assessment until now, he had not seen Jiqing smile so happily for a long time. Recalling all the things in the past at this moment, when he saw Xia Jiqing speak to him so brightly, his heart was filled with emotion. He only hoped that he could often see Xia Jiqing smile like this in the future. Xia Jiqing saw Bai Junyu staring at her, and her pretty face couldn't help but blush. She said, "What are you looking at me for?" Bai Junyu was stunned, and then he retracted his gaze. He touched his forehead and said, "No, nothing." Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu in front of her, and the smile in her eyes deepened. Bai Junyu and Xia Jiqing like this. If someone said that they didn't like each other, no one would believe it. "Let's go. I think Dongfang and the others should be going to the resource hall to get resources now," Bailey Hongzhuang said with a smile. With the voice of Bailey Hongzhuang falling, Bai Junyu and Xia Jiqing both nodded. The two immediately followed Bailey Hongzhuang in the direction of the resource hall. The resource hall was in the center of the 4 major halls, and there was a certain distance to get there. Today, they had just become cultivators of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, and the 3 of them were in a very good mood. At this moment, walking on the road of Tiangang sect, the 3 of them had a happy smile on their faces. In the process of going to the resource hall, suddenly a voice came into the ears of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. "Look, isn't that the future wife of the young master?" "That's right. Who are the man and woman behind her?" "They're all friends of Miss Bailey, and now they have become disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. In this way, doesn't it mean that they are junior brothers and sisters?" "That's natural. The woman in the green dress is very beautiful. At first glance, I have a good impression of her." A man's eyes stopped on Xia Jiqing's body, his face full of excitement and love. Xia Jiqing's appearance was very delicate and pretty. After 2 years of experience in the assessment competition, her delicate and pretty face had a trace of heroic spirit, and she was even more beautiful. What's more, Xia Jiqing's figure was excellent and curvy. Even in the entire Tiangang zone, there were very few women with a hot body like Xia Jiqing. Bailey Hongzhuang is the young sect master's woman, and now the entire Tiangang sect does not dare to have any thoughts about her. However, the new female disciples had always been the focus of the male disciples. Not bad. This woman's looks are indeed outstanding. You have good eyesight. A male disciple kept looking at Xia Jiqing. His eyes were filled with excitement, as if he couldn't wait to come up and greet Xia Jiqing. However, after pondering for a long time, he ultimately did not walk up. This movement was not small. The man may have deliberately attracted Xia Jiqing's attention, so his voice was not hidden at all. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others heard this conversation clearly. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips could not help but evoke a smile. Jiqing's appearance was very outstanding, and there would be many disciples pursuing her in Tiangang sect. Chapter 1809. For a long time, Xia Jiqing had been following Bailey Hongzhuang. The men they met would be attracted by Bailey Hongzhuang at a glance, and few people would pay attention to her. After all, the boss was really too good. No matter when, he attracted everyone's attention like the sun. She never thought that there would be other people paying attention to her now, which really surprised her. However, in addition to being surprised, she also felt a trace of joy. At least, there were still people paying attention to her. During this time, she had been belittling herself, only thinking that she might be an ugly duckling. Today, after a conversation with the boss, coupled with the current scene, she only felt a little more confident in herself. Compared to Xia Jiqing's happiness, Bai Junyu's face was gloomy. Now that Xia Jiqing was getting more and more beautiful, more and more people were paying attention to her. However, he had been stagnant, and there was a sense of insecurity in his heart. If he continued to delay like this, would Jiqing be chased by other men? At the thought of this, Bai Junyu's face was ugly. This was not the situation he wanted to see. He thought that this time he could cultivate with Xia Jiqing in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. He could shorten the distance between them. But now it seemed that in this Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, his opponents were not few. It seemed that he had to hurry up and act. Bailey Hongzhuang casually looked back and saw Bai Junyu's gloomy face, and the smile in her eyes became more and more intense. It seemed that there was no need for her to communicate with Bai Junyu, and they could solve this matter by themselves. After walking for a while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two finally successfully arrived at the Resource Palace Hall. The Resource Palace Hall was also a palace. It was divided into 3 floors and looked very solemn and noble. Every layout showed the heritage, and people did not dare to be too casual. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two could not help but feel a little emotional again. Every place in Tiangang sect gave them a feeling of extreme amazement. This kind of big spending, they could only see it in the sect. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two were about to go in, a familiar voice sounded behind them. Hongzhuang, you've also come to the resource hall. Hearing this voice, even without looking back, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others knew that Dong Fangyu and Gong Xiaoqing had arrived. The 3 of them turned around and saw Gong Xiaoqing, Dong Fangyu, and Pan Zimo walking over together. Pan Zimo clearly got along very well with Gong Xiaoqing and Dong Fangyu. After all, they had helped each other during the exam. Coincidentally, we don't have anything to do today. Naturally, we're here to collect resources from the resource room, Bailey Hongzhuang said with a smile. How do you feel in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall? Gong Xiaoqing asked in a deep voice. Xia Jiqing smiled slightly. When I first saw the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, I was quite shocked. However, I see that this Tiangang sect restrictions on their disciples are not very strong. In the future, we can still often interact. Dong Fangyu chuckled. When we first saw the Azure Dragon Palace, we were also shocked. The entire palace was azure in color, as if it was a coiling azure dragon. It really isn't simple. Just as Dong Fangyu had said, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, where Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were in, was completely red, representing the flames of the Vermilion Bird. Chapter 1810. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. Although they did not cultivate in the same hall, at least they were all in Tiangang sect. There were not many restrictions on the disciples here, and it was very simple for them to get together on weekdays. Although there was some distance for them as cultivators, it was not a distance at all. I have long heard that the cultivation resources of Tiangang's sect disciples are very rich. Today, I can finally come and see it. Pan Zimo smiled. Tiangang's sect was a place he had been yearning for a long time. Today, he could finally become a member here. He had not yet woken up from such a surprise. Listening to Pan Zimo's words, everyone's face was filled with a touch of expectation. Let's go in. Bailey Hongzhuang noticed the joy and eagerness on everyone's faces and immediately said. Everyone nodded and then walked into the resource hall. There were many disciples in the resource hall. Today was the beginning of the month, and the beginning of each month was the day when the cultivation resources were distributed. Therefore, the disciples of Tiangang's sect would come to receive the resources these days. As Bailey Hongzhuang and the others walked into the resource hall, they saw that the entire resource hall was very bright. Looking carefully, they found that the resource hall was also divided into several areas. At first glance, Bailey Hongzhuang saw the resource room of Zhuke Palace Hall. Dongfang Yu and others naturally noticed this situation, and there was a touch of surprise in their eyes. It seems that the disciples of each branch hall will receive cultivation resources in their respective areas. In their line of sight, there were not only the resource rooms of the 4 branches, but also the resource rooms of the Alchemy Palace and the Inscription Palace. This simple appearance gave people a clear feeling at a glance, and they could not help but have a good impression of it. This was the large sect they yearned for. No matter where it was orderly. I don't know if the cultivation resources of each branch hall will be different. Xia Jiqing's eyes flashed with a curious light. Although the 4 branches of Tiangang's sect all belonged to Tiangang's sect, everything was separated. Gong Xiaoqing's handsome face was filled with wisdom. The cultivation resources should not be different. They were all new disciples, and it was reasonable to say that the things they were allocated should be the same. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing nodded. It should be so. I'm just a little curious. Let's not stand here in a daze. Let's take our cultivation resources first. Dongfang Yu smiled. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were about to go to their respective resource rooms to receive resources, a familiar and joyful voice entered their ears. Boss, you're all here. Glancing to the side, he saw Yuan Xiaoman, Yuan Jixin, and Dong Hongyun walking out of the White Tiger Hall's resource room. You've already received your cultivation resources. That's quite fast. Dongfang Yu also greeted them. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. That's right. We're all here to collect cultivation resources. Yuan Xiaoman walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Her charming face was filled with amazement. Boss, Tiangang's sect reputation is really not just for show. I finally understand why the strength of the sect disciples is so amazing. Their cultivation resources are much richer than the outside world. Chapter 1811. These cultivation resources, she usually couldn't have so much in a year, but in Tiangang's sect, it was only a month's worth of cultivation resources for cultivators. With so many cultivation resources, coupled with the Yuan Li here that was richer than the outside world, it was impossible for the strength of the cultivators to not improve faster than the cultivators in the outside world. In the past, she always heard that whether it was a cultivator from a sect or an aristocratic family, the reason why they could have such impressive strength at such a young age was that they were completely piled up with resources. She had never understood what it meant to be stacked with cultivation resources. Now that she had come to Tiangang's sect, she completely understood. They were currently just new disciples of Tiangang's sect, but they already had so many cultivation resources. If they performed well in the White Tiger Hall in the future, these cultivation resources may even rise, which was too terrifying. At this moment, she finally understood why the genius cultivators in the aristocratic families were able to look down on others at such a young age. This was not entirely because their cultivation talent was outstanding, but more because of their generous conditions. She believed that even with her talent, if she was from a cultivation family, her strength would be extremely powerful now. Listening to Yuan Xiaoman's words, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. Yes, It is because of this that there are so many cultivators who want to enter the sect. Xiaoman, I was originally curious about how many cultivation resources there are, but now listening to you, I'm even more looking forward to it. Xia Jiqing's face was full of excitement. It seemed that the cultivation resources were really rich to the point of being surprising. Haha, then you go and get the cultivation resources first. Yuan Xiaoman chuckled. Bailey Hongzhuang and Xia Jiqing looked at each other, then walked in the direction of the Vermilion Bird Hall. Gong Xiaoqing and the other two no longer stayed and immediately went to the resource room of the Azure Dragon Hall. Yuan Xiaoman, Yuan Jixin, and Dong Hongyan walked out of the resource hall and waited for everyone outside. At this moment, there were many cultivators in the resource hall. If they all stood in the resource room, wouldn't it be very troublesome? Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two arrived at the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's resource room. An elder was standing there. When he saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two appear, he said, "Give me your identity medallions." Earlier, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two had obtained identity badges from the Qinquan bag from the resource elder of the White Tiger Palace. After hearing the elder's words, they immediately took out their identity badges. Bailey Hongzhuang handed her ID card to the elder. After checking the information on the ID card, the elder said, "New disciple." "Yes." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. The elder then recorded Bailey Hongzhuang's information in his handbook. After that, he said to Bailey Hongzhuang, "Go to the back and get the cultivation resources." As the elder's voice fell, a disciple behind the elder showed a respectful smile to Bailey Hongzhuang. "Junior Sister Bailey, please come with me to get the cultivation resources." Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly and followed the disciple to the back of the resource room. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu also handed their identity medallions to the elder, and the elder recorded their information. Chapter 1812. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang had already received her own cultivation resources. The disciple's attitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang was simply respectful to the point that it couldn't be more respectful. He was polite everywhere, as if Bailey Hongzhuang was not his junior sister, but an elder. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang also understood that the other party was polite to her because of her relationship with Di Beichen. Now in the entire Tiangang sect, almost no one did not know the relationship between her and Di Beichen. Along the way, almost all the cultivators were respectful to her. She felt a little helpless about this situation. After all, she originally did not come to Tiangang sect with such an idea. However, thinking about it carefully, there was nothing bad about this. With this identity, there would be very few cultivators who would dare to find trouble with her, so she could cultivate in peace. During the assessment, there were countless people who found trouble with her, so it was good to be able to have some peace now. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu also quickly received their cultivation resources and appeared behind Bailey Hongzhuang. "Boss, we have already received our cultivation resources. Let's go back now." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. "Let's go out, Xiaoman, and the others are still waiting for us outside." When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked out of the resource hall, Dong Fengyu and the other two also walked out. Yuan Xiaoman could not help but walk to Xia Jiqing's side and said with a smile, "Jiqing, let's see if our cultivation resources are the same." "Okay." Xia Jiqing chuckled and immediately compared herself with Yuan Xiaoman. Through this comparison, the two found that their cultivation resources were exactly the same, and there was no difference. "Sure enough, it's the same." Xia Jiqing sighed, and her eyes fell on Gong Xiaoqing. "Xiaoqing, what you said is really right." Dong Hongyun could not help but frown. Since everyone will receive the same amount of cultivation resources, then why do we have to separate the different palaces? Isn't this superfluous? If everyone received the same amount of resources, then the resource rooms of the 4 sub-halls could be integrated together. Dong Fengyu and the others looked at each other as doubts surfaced in their eyes. They couldn't understand this either. However, since Tiangang sect made such an arrangement, they must have their reasons. Every branch hall receives different cultivation resources, but because you are all new disciples, the cultivation resources you receive are the same. A low and magnetic voice rang out behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Di Beichen's face was filled with a handsome and sunny smile. Seeing the appearance of Di Beichen, Xia Jiqing and the others were stunned for a moment. Obviously, they didn't expect that Di Beichen would appear at this moment. Bailey Hongzhuang was also a little surprised. Di Beichen did not tell her that he would be here. What's more, they had only been in the resource hall for a short time. How did Di Beichen know that she would be here? Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichen, and her dark eyes were filled with doubt. Di Beichen noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's puzzled look and felt helpless. He knew that it was not appropriate for him to accompany Hongzhuang to the Vermilion Bird Hall. What's more, the four temple masters had to explain some things to the new disciples. If he was there, it would undoubtedly have some impact. Chapter 1813. Earlier on, he had already told Hongzhuang that she would go to the palace to look for him after she had settled everything. However, he waited in the palace for a long time and did not see Hongzhuang come. Logically speaking, the matter should have been settled by then. Then he found out that Hongzhuang had come to the resource hall. He happened to have nothing to do in the palace, so he came to the resource hall to look for Hongzhuang. Noticing Di Beichen's slightly helpless gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately understood. She thought that Di Beichen had not seen her return, so he specially came to look for her. Greetings, young sect leader. Gong Shaoqing and the others bowed to Di Beichen. Before they became disciples of Tiangang sect, Di Beichen was their friend. Now, they were already members of Tiangang sect. When they saw Di Beichen, they naturally had to bow. Di Beichen nodded slightly and did not stop them. All the cultivators in Tiangang sect called him that. If he stopped them, it would make things more difficult for them. Beichen, you said that the resources received by each branch hall's cultivators are different? Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows. She did not miss this news. Why would the cultivation resources of the four branch halls be different? That's right. There has always been competition between the four halls. Every year, there will be a competition between the four branch halls. The cultivation resources of each branch hall's disciples will be determined based on the results of this competition. Whichever branch hall's results are the best, they will receive the most abundant cultivation resources in the following year. Similarly, whichever branch hall's results are the worst, their disciples will receive the worst cultivation resources in the following year. You are new disciples, so the cultivation resources you receive are the same as other new disciples. After the next competition between the four branch palaces, your cultivation resources will be the same as the other disciples of the branch palaces. Di Beichen carefully told Bailey Hongzhuang and others about the matter. In Tiangang sect, there was competition everywhere. After hearing Di Beichen's explanation, everyone had a look of realization. I didn't expect that the cultivation resources of the four branch palaces would be different. This is really surprising. Yuan Xiaoman's face was filled with amazement. It seems that in the future, when the four sub-palaces compete, we will have to give it our all. After all, this would affect their cultivation resources for the next year. If he was at the bottom of the four halls, it would not only be a humiliation, but his cultivation would also be quickly overtaken by others. This was something that no one wanted to see. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with admiration and amazement. The sects from 1,000 years ago did not have so many methods. Now, after seeing the scenes of Tiangang sect, she also felt that this method was more mature and had a greater stimulation for the disciples. In such an atmosphere, the disciples would not dare to slack off even if they wanted to. They could only rush forward at full speed. So the next time we meet, we will be competitors? Yuan Jixin's face was filled with a sunny and handsome smile. He really did not think that one day he might become the boss's opponent. Chapter 1814. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, everyone nodded. Although they belonged to different halls, they were all disciples of Tiangang sect. Even if they became opponents in the future, it would just be a mutual exchange of pointers, and there would be no impact. In a few days, there will be other new disciples coming to the sect. They will also compete with you, so you have to work hard. Di Beichen's eyes were deep. Now that everyone was here, he naturally hoped that everyone could achieve good results. Don't worry, we will not be defeated by those guys. Bai Junyu's eyes flashed with a firm light. No matter who their future opponents were, They would not back down. Seeing that everyone was very confident, Di Beichen was also relieved. It's getting late, we'll go back first. Gong Xiaoqing glanced at the surrounding situation and then said. Their group was standing not far from the door of the resource hall, and all the disciples coming and going were looking at them. What's more, there was also Di Beichen standing here. He knew very well that Di Beichen would never come here to explain things to them. He must have come to pick up Bailey Hongzhuang. It was extremely inappropriate for them to continue to disturb Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's relationship here. Listening to Gong Xiaoqing's words, everyone nodded. Then let's go back. We'll meet again later. Yuan Jixin smiled. Everyone went to their respective halls. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's eyes could not help but fall on Bailey Hongzhuang. Where was Hongzhuang going now? At this time, Di Beichen said, Junyu, Jiqing, you go back to the Vermilion Bird Hall first. As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu suddenly understood. Boss, then we'll go back first. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Okay, you go back first. After everyone left, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichen and asked, Did you come here to look for me? If I'm not here to look for you, do you think I'm here to collect cultivation resources from the resource hall? Di Beichen's voice was gentle and powerful. His eyes, which were as deep as the sea, were filled with love and tenderness. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and smiled. If you're here to receive cultivation resources, there's nothing strange about that. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was deliberately joking, Di Beichen felt helpless. He immediately held Bailey Hongzhuang's small hand and walked forward. Suddenly being held by Di Beichen, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Many disciples came and went outside the resource hall, and many people saw this scene. Beichen. Di Beichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang behind him. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's embarrassed look, he couldn't help but smile. What's wrong with me? Many people are watching. Then let them watch. Sooner or later, you'll be my wife, Di Beichen's wife. Just let everyone know. Di Beichen's lips were filled with a confident and dazzling smile. He held Bailey Hongzhuang's hand firmly, not allowing Bailey Hongzhuang to escape. Looking at the domineering appearance of the man in front of her, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly raised a smile. She had to say that she was still happy in her heart. Bailey Hongzhuang was led by Di Beichen all the way to the direction of the palace. She said, Beichen, starting tomorrow, I'll cultivate in the Vermilion Bird Hall. Chapter 1815. As Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen got closer and closer to the bedroom, the number of cultivators around also decreased until only the two of them were left. The density of origin energy in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's meditation field is not comparable to the cultivation room in my bedroom. You might as well cultivate here rather than there, Di Beichen said slowly. Although he and Hongzhuang were together previously, the time they spent together was very short. Now that Hongzhuang finally stayed in Tiangang's sect, if she stayed in Vermilion Bird Palace Hall to cultivate, then wouldn't he not be able to see Hongzhuang often again? This was not a situation he wanted to see. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned slightly. The situation is indeed like this, but I'm clearly a disciple of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. If I always stay in your bedroom to cultivate, it would be too inappropriate. What's inappropriate about that? Who dares to say anything? Di Beichen's tone was domineering and fearless. As the young sect master of Tiangang's sect, who would dare to gossip about him? Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang wrinkled her nose and said, Naturally, no one will say anything in front of others, but there will definitely be many people criticizing behind closed doors. The human heart was the most difficult thing to control. They were unable to control the thoughts of other cultivators. She had originally planned to perform well in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall and reduce some of the voices of criticism. What's there to care about other people's thoughts? After we get married, they will all shut up. Currently, Bailey Hongzhuang was the young sect master's wife in the eyes of Tiangang's sect disciples. Although they were not married yet, this was already set in stone. It was because of this that the criticism would be much lesser and would definitely not be as unbridled as 2 years ago. Hearing Di Beichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang did not say much and only quietly stared at Di Beichen. Feeling Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze, Di Beichun thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you cultivate in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall during the day and come to my bedroom at night?" Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang's expression did not change, Di Beichun continued, "This is the bottom line. If you don't agree, I can only look for you." He didn't care what other people thought. After all, Di Beichun, was pestering Bailey Hongzhuang. "Besides, I'm going to train in the desert world with you." Di Beichun's smile was as bright as the sun. No matter what, he couldn't let Hongzhuang stay in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall forever. Seeing that Di Beichun was determined not to give in, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay then, I'll come over at night." Just as Di Beichun had said, they were going to train in the desert world together. Naturally, she couldn't stay in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall forever. There were many disciples meditating in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's meditation area every day. Because the concentration of elemental energy there was stronger than inside the room, almost all the practitioners would choose to stay there. It was naturally inappropriate for her not to go there. If she left at night, it shouldn't be a big deal. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's reply, Di Beichun finally revealed a satisfied smile. His slender fingers scratched Bailey Hongzhuang's nose and said, "That's my good wife." Bailey Hongzhuang glared at Di Beichun. She was now completely at her wits' end with Di Beichun. The next day, before dawn, Bailey Hongzhuang had already returned to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Chapter 18:16. After the three beasts came out of the desert world, they rested in the cultivation room. They were also exhausted. Because Di Beichun was cultivating with them in the desert world, they went deeper into the desert and scrupulously. As a result, the strength of the monsters that appeared was also more and more powerful. With Di Beichun's strength, it was naturally no problem to deal with these monsters, but Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasts felt a huge pressure. With the idea of improving their own strength, they would never ask Di Beichun for help unless they couldn't hold on anymore. As a result, every battle could be said to be exhausted and even walking on the edge of death. Although this method was extremely tiring, the speed of improvement was also very fast. Therefore, they still enjoyed this kind of cultivation and never got tired of it. If you want to improve your cultivation, you often have to grow in abuse. Bailey Hongzhuang returned to her room. After many times of cultivation in the desert world, her endurance was also constantly improving. She still remembered the first time she came out of the desert world. She was exhausted. Now the monsters she encountered in the desert world were getting stronger and stronger, but she was not as tired as before. She could clearly feel her progress, and in the long run, she felt that the improvement would be more obvious. After freshening up in the room for a while, Bailey Hongzhuang walked out of the room. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu also came out at this moment. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang, both of them smiled. "Boss, you also got up." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. "Yes, let's go to the martial arts field together." Xia Jiqing had some doubts in her heart. Since the boss and the young sect master left together yesterday, she had not seen the boss. She didn't know when the boss came back. However, Xia Jiqing did not think much in this regard. The boss and the young sect master were originally husband and wife, and now living together was a matter of course. "I really want to see what the martial arts field looks like." Xia Jiqing's eyes flashed with excitement. Everything in Tiangang Zone could give people a sense of shock. The martial training field was undoubtedly the place where the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples often gathered. She would be able to see many of her senior brothers and sisters there. She also wanted to see them. "Then let's go." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two immediately headed towards the martial arts field. They had never been to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's martial arts field, but there was a map in the Chinquin bag that the resource elder had given them. The map clearly indicated the distribution of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Therefore, they also knew where the martial arts training field was. As Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked towards the martial arts field, they realized that the number of disciples around them was gradually increasing. Clearly, these disciples were heading to the martial arts field like them. Currently, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's new disciples were only the three of them. So the cultivators who appeared beside them were all senior brothers and sisters who had arrived earlier. The eyes of many disciples fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. If it was a normal day when a new disciple came, they would definitely come up to communicate with them. However, because of Bailey Hongzhuang's special identity, they did not dare to come forward and disturb her. If they caused Bailey Hongzhuang to be unhappy, then they would really have to bear the consequences. Chapter 1817. For Bailey Hongzhuang, she had never been a person who cared about her identity. As long as she treated people with sincerity, they were her friends. However, she had just arrived at the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, and many people did not know her character. Naturally, they would not disturb her. If it was her, she would have the same idea. With the surrounding disciples leading the way, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two did not need to worry about not being able to find the place. As long as they followed everyone, they would be able to reach it. The martial arts field and the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall itself were not on the same mountain peak, but on a mountain peak next to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. The whole mountain peak was raised to the ground from the top, as if there was a huge axe that cut the mountain in half, smooth and flat. A large and amazing martial arts field appeared. The open-air martial arts field was spectacular and huge. At a glance, one could see a group of disciples sitting on a futon and meditating. In a place further away, there was an empty training field with an arena in it. Seeing this scene, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. As early as yesterday, they had already felt that Tiangong sect style was amazing, but when they saw this martial arts field, it was even more than before. Such a large martial arts field, it was really the first time they had seen it. The feeling of having so many cultivators meditating and cultivating at the same time was completely different. Oh my God, this is too shocking. Xia Jiqing couldn't help but sigh. After coming to Tiangong sect, she really felt that she had seen the world. She suddenly felt that 2 years ago, the disciples of Tiangong sect ridiculed them for not seeing the world. Perhaps it was somewhat reasonable, because before, their eyes had always been confined to a small range. When they participated in the assessment competition, they had already broadened their horizons. But now, after seeing the various arrangements of Tiangong sect, their horizons were even wider. So many cultivators meditating together, I always feel that it is a very interesting thing. Bai Junyu's face was filled with a handsome and warm smile. On ordinary days, they would stay in their own houses to cultivate. There had never been so many people in the same place to cultivate. Therefore, he had a very novel feeling. Mutual supervision and encouragement is indeed very interesting. Bailey Hongzhuang's delicate and beautiful face was filled with appreciation. She sighed inwardly. 1,000 years later, the way the sect trained its disciples was indeed much better than 1,000 years ago. Let's go over quickly. We will cultivate here today. Xia Jiqing smiled. Looking at Xia Jiqing's excited face, Bailey Hongzhuang and Bai Junyu looked at each other, and both of them smiled. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two entered the practice area. The moment Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked in, they could feel that the concentration of elemental energy here was roughly 2.5 times that of the outside world. The concentration of elemental energy in other parts of Tiangong sect was equal to twice that of the outside world. Although it was only a 50% increase, it was already very good. If he cultivated here for a long time, his cultivation speed would be much faster than in the outside world. In the middle of the entire training field, there was a pitch-black pillar. The name, cultivation level, and ranking of every cultivator was clearly recorded on the pillar. Chapter 1818. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two couldn't help but take a few steps closer along the passage, wanting to see their rankings. After all, they had to first understand their current level of strength in Tiangong sect. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked to the front of the ranking pillar, they looked for their names below. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang found where her name was. Rank 581, Yellow Realm 7th level. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's rankings appeared in the 800th place, which was the real bottom. Seeing this scene, Xia Jiqing couldn't help but sigh. It seems that my judgment is really not wrong. I really am at the bottom. Although she had already expected such a result, she still couldn't help but have some expectations in her heart. She only hoped that her results were not so bad. However, the final result clearly told her that this was the truth, and it was useless to have any wishful thinking. Fortunately, the number of cultivators with the same cultivation is not small. As long as you break through one level, your ranking can be improved a lot. Bai Junyu smiled and comforted Xia Jiqing after seeing the frustrated look on her face. Such an outcome was within their expectations. After all, the other cultivators had been cultivating in Tiangang sect for a while, and their cultivation was naturally much stronger than theirs. When the next time they recruited disciples, their strength would also be much stronger than the later cultivators. Listening to Bai Junyu's words, Xia Jiqing nodded and could only comfort herself like this. Such a result was really a bit shameful. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes stopped at the words Yellow Realm 7th level. Her current strength was no longer Yellow Realm 7th level. Since the end of the assessment, she had been working hard to cultivate and had not stopped. What's more, she and Beichun had been cultivating in the desert world during this time. With deep Beichun, Bailey Hongzhuang could also meditate in the desert world, but she needed someone to pay attention to the movements around her. At night, they went into the desert world and cultivated in the desert world for 3 days. When the 3 days were up, they came out during the day, so they had a good rest. When night fell, they once again entered the desert world. Under such circumstances, her improvement speed was very fast. What's more, her grandfather treated her exceptionally well after reuniting with her. He gave her a lot of cultivation resources. With these cultivation resources, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately used them. For the current her, the most important thing was to increase her own strength. Everything else was inconsequential. Under such circumstances, the speed of her and Di Beichun's improvement was obvious. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was wondering about this cultivation, a man walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. The man was wearing a green robe. He was about 25 years old and had a dignified appearance. He was polite and refined. Junior sister Bailey, junior sister Xia, junior brother Bai, I am the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's eldest senior brother. My name is Gue Jinyuan. Gue Jinyuan's face was filled with a friendly and polite smile, making people unable to feel the slightest bit of vigilance and disgust. The ranking pillar is a record of your cultivation at the end of the assessment. Now that 3 months have passed, the ranking is no longer accurate. Chapter 1819. Gue Jinyuan's determined and calm face had a faint smile as he carefully introduced the ranking pillar to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. I see. Bailey Hongzhuang revealed a look of realization. Previously, she felt that the cultivation level recorded on the ranking pillar was not accurate. It turned out that she had to re-examine it. Gue Jinyuan nodded. Not bad. The ranking pillars test is very accurate. Even for cultivators of the same cultivation level, the ranking pillar can still determine the ranking based on their origin power level. It's extremely accurate. As soon as he said this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two's eyes were filled with astonishment. They thought that cultivators of the same cultivation level would be ranked the same. They did not expect the ranking pillar to be so accurate. It was truly shocking. Thank you for telling me, eldest senior brother. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly bowed as a faint and charming smile appeared on her charming face. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang bowing to him, Gue Jinyuan hurriedly said, I don't dare. Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled. Senior brother Gue is my senior brother. It's only right for me to bow. Why would I not dare? Although it was her first time meeting Gue Jinyuan, Bailey Hongzhuang had a very good impression of him. This Gue Jinyuan spoke elegantly and had a very good attitude. It was no wonder that he could become the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's eldest senior brother. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Gue Jinyuan was slightly stunned. After noticing that Bailey Hongzhuang's words came from her heart, his gaze changed a little. As the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's eldest senior brother, he had the obligation to tell all the new disciples about everything here when they came here. After such a long time, he had long been used to it. In his opinion, being able to have the opportunity to help the new junior brothers and sisters was an extremely good thing. Perhaps it was because of his personality that he had always been very popular in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. He knew the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, the future wife of the young master of Tiangang sect. Who didn't know this identity? He had never come into contact with Bailey Hongzhuang. He only thought that Bailey Hongzhuang should be as high and mighty as Han Xiling. However, at this moment, looking at this approachable and beautiful woman in front of him, he really found it hard to believe that she was Bailey Hongzhuang. There was undoubtedly a huge difference from what he had imagined. However, such a Bailey Hongzhuang made it easier for people to have a good impression of her. Junior Sister Bailey, you can infuse your essence energy at the bottom of the ranking pillar to determine your ranking. Here, many cultivators will come here every time they make a breakthrough in their cultivation to see how far their ranking has risen, Gui Jianyuan said with a smile. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two nodded. Come to think of it, every disciple hoped that their ranking would rise quickly. Therefore, every time there was a little bit of progress, everyone would come here to test it. Eldest senior brother, thank you. Xia Jiqing thanked him. Gui Jianyuan waved his hand. As the eldest senior brother, telling you these is my duty. In the future, if there is anything you don't understand, or if you need help, just come to me. As long as I can help, I will not refuse. My room number is 1. Looking at such a calm and generous Gui Jianyuan, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two had a good impression of him. At least, after knowing Gui Jianyuan, they would be able to consult him if they didn't understand anything in the future. Chapter 1820. Gui Jianyuan's face was filled with a warm smile. After indicating that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others did not need to thank him, he returned to the futon and continued to meditate and cultivate. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two's eyes fell on a ranking pillar. They also had to reconfirm their ranking. Xia Jiqing was the first to go to the testing place. Her body's power surged out. Her right hand covered the bottom of the ranking pillar, and her power quickly poured into it. Then, a subtle light bloomed, and Xia Jiqing retracted her right hand. However, although Xia Jiqing rechecked, the ranking still did not change at all. Seeing this, Xia Jiqing sighed discouragingly. I'm really the last one. Although she already knew that she was the last one. After hearing Gui Jianyuan's introduction, she couldn't help but have some hope in her heart. Unexpectedly, the final result was exactly the same as before. There was no change. Looking at Xia Jiqing's appearance, Bai Junyu patted Xia Jiqing's shoulder and said, Your ranking will rise soon. Don't worry. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing nodded slightly, but there was still a bit of helplessness in her expression. Since Jiqing's ranking has not changed, there should not be any difference in my ranking. It's better to wait until I break through and then test again. Bai Junyu said slowly. In the 3 months of relaxation, they spent most of their time resting and visiting relatives and friends. Their cultivation base did not make much progress. Therefore, there was no need to test at all. Xia Jiqing then looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and said, Boss, do you want to test? She always felt that the strength of the boss was a bit stronger than when they were separated, but it was just her feeling and she couldn't judge. In terms of cultivation, the boss had always been extremely diligent. She had been with the boss for so long, and she had never seen the boss slack off in cultivation. Thinking about it, the boss should not have neglected her cultivation during the time she was in Tiangang sect. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly, her beautiful face shining with a bright smile. With her current strength, she was also at the lower level among the disciples of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. However, she believed that it would not be long before her ranking would rise all the way. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's right hand also covered the bottom of the ranking stone as the yuan power in her body quickly surged out. Following the emergence of this elemental energy, a faint but sparkling green light quietly appeared. Looking at this green light, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's eyes were filled with surprise. Why was Bailey Hongzhuang's test different from Xia Jiqing's test? Then, they noticed that Bailey Hongzhuang's ranking kept moving up and finally stopped at the 300th place. Bailey Hongzhuang, 300th place, Green Realm Level 1. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's eyes were fixed on the words green territory, and their eyes couldn't help but be filled with a strong sense of amazement. Green territory? Xia Jiqing's eyes widened. and her pretty face was full of disbelief. Boss, you actually broke through to the Green Realm? Bai Junyu also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in a daze. This improvement was a little too shocking. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. I just broke through a few days ago. Boss, isn't your breakthrough speed a little too abnormal? It's such a blow to us. Chapter 1821. Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation speed had always been very fast. It was not only because her talent was strong enough, but also because of her hard work. Few people could compare to her. However, it had only been 3 months since the end of the assessment competition. Usually, people would take a good rest in these 3 months. After all, the days before were too hard. However, Bailey Hongzhuang did not seem to feel tired at all. No matter what the situation was, she never stopped cultivating. It was fine if she did not stop, but now that she had reached the first level of the Green Realm, she had completely left them behind. Hongzhuang, did you spend all your time on cultivation? Bai Junyu's expression was gloomy. He suddenly felt that he did not need so much supervision from Tiangang's sect. As long as he was with Bailey Hongzhuang, there was no possibility of them slacking off. Thinking back to when they were in Azure Water School, their cultivation was about the same, but now Bailey Hongzhuang was much stronger than him. However, during this period of time, they had come together. It really made people sigh with emotion. Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and nodded, more or less. Basically, I'm cultivating. She still had too many things to do. It would not do if she did not cultivate properly. Although the speed of her cultivation was already very fast, it was far from enough for her. She wanted to defeat Lan Qingyan. Lan Qingyan was older than her by a few years. Based on Di Beiqin and Xiren's cultivation, Lan Qingyan should have reached the Green Realm. However, she had just broken through to the Green Realm. The gap between them was still very big. If she wanted to defeat Lan Qingyan fair and square, she had to put in more effort. All these years, Lan Qingyan had obtained her Rainbow Pearl and was still proud of herself in the Lan family. She thought that she was talented and was born to be a great person. Lan Qingyan even belittled and ridiculed her. In Lan Qingyan's words, Lan Yixuan was destined to die young. Who asked her parents to not take care of her? She deserved it. Only she was the true successor of the Lan family. After knowing the words that Lan Qingyan had once said, she decided that she must defeat Lan Qingyan in front of everyone, not only for her, but also for her parents. She wanted to let everyone know that things that didn't belong to them didn't belong to them. Even if Lan Qingyan had snatched away what belonged to her, she could still crush Lan Qingyan. It was precisely because of this that she was exceptionally diligent in her cultivation. She had no time to waste. After hearing the words of Bailey Hongzhuang, Xia Jiqing couldn't help but be speechless. Boss, you've been separated from young sect master for such a long time, and it's not easy for you to have a chance to get along. You actually spent all your time on cultivation? Aren't you a little too unromantic? Xia Jiqing had always thought that during this period of time, the boss and the young lord were together. They must be inseparable. But now, she realized that the situation was not like that at all. Bai Junyu didn't know what to say at this moment. He only felt that Hongzhuang didn't seem to need a rest at all. Bailey Hongzhuang. He was afraid that she was born to be a character. After all, even if many cultivators worked hard, they couldn't reach the level of Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 1822. Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged and said with a smile, Beiqin won't care. She also wanted to travel with Beiqin and have a good rest for a while. However, in this situation, it was obviously not easy to rest. Di Beiqin would also understand her. For Di Beiqin, she had always felt a little guilty. Di Beiqin was too tolerant of her. No matter what, he always supported her as always. If there was no Di Beiqin's support, she would have had a harder time now. Fortunately, the lifespan of a cultivator was very long. As long as she rescued her parents and got her revenge, she could live with Di Beiqin in peace. She believed that Di Beiqin also thought so. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's natural look, Xia Jiqing was helpless. Boss, the young sect master really spoils you. You have to cherish it. If it was an ordinary man, I'm afraid that he wouldn't be able to stand the boss, putting all her energy into cultivation. Xia Jiqing only felt that since she saw the young sect master, she felt that this was the real appearance of a good man. No matter what the boss did, the young sect master would always support her without any complaints. Just this point alone was already extremely difficult. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded. I understand. She would cherish Di Beichun because he was the person who would walk hand in hand with her for the rest of her life. Speaking of which, boss, isn't your cultivation speed a little too heaven-defying? Before, you were at Orange Realm 7th level. In just 3 months, your cultivation has increased by a full 3 levels. If this news is spread out, I'm afraid everyone will be shocked, right? Xia Jiqing was incredulous. She really didn't understand how the boss cultivated. This kind of cultivation speed would scare a lot of people to death. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly and did not answer Xia Jiqing's question. Although on the surface it seemed that she had only cultivated for a little more than 2 months, in addition to the time in the desert world, she had already cultivated for more than half a year. Moreover, with an abundance of cultivation resources, her speed of improvement was naturally extremely fast. We have to work hard. Otherwise, we don't know where Hongzhuang will leave us in the dust. Bai Junyu faintly sighed, his expression revealing a bit of amusement. If Gong Shaoqing and the others knew about the speed at which Bailey Hongzhuang had been plotting, their expressions would not be any better than theirs. Xia Jiqing nodded, looking serious and firm. Yes, we must work hard. She wanted to be boss's right-hand man, but with her current cultivation, she couldn't help at all, let alone be his right-hand man. Boss, you're already in the 300th place. You're definitely a powerful existence among the new disciples. I believe that even if those cultivators from aristocratic families were to come here, they would definitely be no match for you. Xia Jiqing's eyes flashed with excitement. Although her own strength was destined to be at the bottom, the boss's strength was very strong. She hadn't seen the other new disciples yet, but there was a certain competition between the new disciples. As long as the boss's ranking was high enough, then they would have the confidence. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. It's not clear yet. We will only know when the other new disciples arrive. Chapter 1823. Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely the most popular person in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Therefore, after Bailey Hongzhuang reevaluated her ability, most of the cultivators had their eyes on the pillar. They want to know how Bailey Hongzhuang's results were. After all, the news that Bailey Hongzhuang was at Yellow Realm level 7 was just a rumor. None of them knew her real cultivation level. As a new disciple, Yellow Realm level 7 was not bad. However, as the champion of the assessment competition, everyone was still doubtful. However, when they saw Bailey Hongzhuang's ranking quickly rise and finally stop at the 300th place, the eyes of the disciples were filled with surprise. Green Realm level 1? Bailey Hongzhuang has already reached the first level of the Green Realm? Wasn't she just Yellow Realm level 7 previously? It'd only been 3 months. How could Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly reach Green Realm level 1? Could it be that the news from last time wasn't accurate enough? Green Realm level 1. With such ability, she could be ranked in the middle in the entire Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang's ability is not simple. I saw that she was getting along well with eldest senior brother just now. She seems to be much better than Han Shieling. That's not necessarily true. Who doesn't know eldest senior brother's character? No matter how bad the other party is, eldest senior brother will treat them with respect. Everyone was discussing. They had to admit that Bailey Hongzhuang's Green Realm level 1 cultivation level made them speechless. At such a young age, and with such a cultivation level, she was outstanding in both ability and talent. Compared to Han Shieling, they felt that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability was more outstanding. If Han Shieling was still alive, he would not be Bailey Hongzhuang's opponent. The disciples who originally wanted to use this incident to mock her were now silent. They felt that Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master were becoming more and more compatible. No one could find fault with them. Boss, let's find a place to cultivate first. Xia Jiqing couldn't help but say after seeing the eyes of the disciples stop on them. After all the disciples were cultivating in the direction of the ranking pillar. The place where they were standing was undoubtedly where everyone was paying attention. As a result, it was a bit awkward. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly and smiled. Okay, let's go together. The three people quickly walked to the back. The front seats were already filled with disciples. They just needed to find an empty seat to sit and cultivate. Casually finding 3 adjacent empty seats, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others sat down. Xia Jiqing smiled. Jiqing's realm level 1's cultivation level. Jiqing Yin Zhuang's Jiqing. Jiqing's Jiqing realm level realm. Jiqing realm's Hongzhuang's realm cultivation Hongzhuang realm. The concentration of spirit energy in the small world was also equivalent to 2 times that of the outside world. She didn't expect that the concentration of spirit energy here would reach 2.5 times. The thing that left the deepest impression on her was the stairway to heaven that she encountered in the ruins. Cultivating in that kind of place where origin energy was dense, the speed of cultivation was simply shocking. Now she really missed the heaven stairway. If she could cultivate on the heaven stairway for a while, her cultivation would break through again.